My name is Camille, and at 30 years old, I learned that the people who share your blood can be the most toxic poison in your life. I am a medical 3D design director, a self-made woman who fought for every ounce of success I have achieved. But to my family, I was always just a stepping stone for my older brother Jason. 6 months ago, at my parents' lavish anniversary dinner, my pregnant sister-in-law looked at my fragile 6-year-old son and told the entire family he might as well be dead. My parents sat there and actively defended her cruelty. What they did not know was that their betrayal would set off a chain of events that would strip them of their false wealth and end with her own child begging me for rescue. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your children from the very people who were supposed to love them. Growing up in a historic, affluent North Shore mansion in Chicago meant that appearances were everything to my parents, Thomas and Diane. To the outside world, we were the perfect picture of success and grace. Inside those grand walls, however, there was a rigid, toxic hierarchy, and my brother Jason, who is 32, was always at the very top. He was the golden child, the undisputed prince of the family, who could do absolutely no wrong. I was merely the backup plan, the daughter expected to be quiet, accommodating, and relentlessly supportive of whatever Jason wanted to do. When Jason married Nia, a 31-year-old African-American woman with an insatiable taste for the finer things in life, my parents welcomed her with open arms. Nia was undeniably charismatic, but she harbored a deep-seated bitter jealousy toward me. I had built a highly successful career running my own medical design firm, while she and Jason lived a lifestyle heavily subsidized by my parents' wealth. When Nia announced she was pregnant with a boy, the first grandson to carry on the family name, she was instantly elevated to the status of a queen in my parents' house. Her every whim was catered to, and her arrogant behavior was completely unchecked. I had two beautiful children of my own, 6-year-old Leo and 4-year-old Mia. Leo was my brave little boy, but he suffered from a severe peanut allergy. Just a few weeks before my parents' anniversary dinner, they had insisted on babysitting Leo and Mia, so I could attend a critical medical design conference. Despite my explicit written instructions and clearly labeled emergency kits, my mother decided my allergy rules were just me being an overly anxious mother. She gave Leo a granola bar that contained peanut oil because she thought organic meant safe. The resulting anaphylactic shock nearly killed my son. I spent 3 terrifying, agonizing days in the pediatric intensive care unit, watching machines breathe for my little boy, while my parents sat in the waiting room complaining about how the hospital chairs were uncomfortable. Leo miraculously survived, but his lungs were weakened, leaving him dependent on a mini oxygen machine while he slowly recovered at home. My parents never apologized for what they did. Instead, they acted as though my distress was a dramatic overreaction that somehow inconvenienced their social schedule. Despite my overwhelming anger and lingering trauma, I agreed to attend their anniversary dinner. I wanted to keep the peace for the sake of family tradition, a foolish mistake I would soon deeply regret. The dining room of the North Shore mansion was decorated with elaborate floral arrangements and expensive crystal that caught the dim, elegant lighting. I sat near the far end of the long mahogany table, keeping a very close eye on Leo. His quiet breathing was accompanied by the soft, rhythmic hum of his portable oxygen concentrator. Mia sat quietly beside him, drawing on a linen napkin. The evening was entirely dominated by toasts to Jason and Nia. My parents fawned over Nia, bringing her special imported mocktails and talking endlessly about the lavish new nursery they were personally funding. I sat in silence, cutting up a piece of chicken for Leo, who was too exhausted to eat much. He leaned his small head against my arm, looking pale and frail, but offering me a sweet, tired smile. Nia sat directly across from us. She had been sipping her drink and glaring at me all evening, visibly annoyed that Leo's medical equipment was making a faint sound. She rolled her eyes every time an extended family member cast a sympathetic glance toward my son. Nia hated whenever the spotlight shifted away from her pregnancy, even if it was for a sick child recovering from near death. The conversation around the table soon turned to genetics and family traits. My father proudly boasted about the strong, superior genes Jason would pass down to the new baby. Nia smiled smugly, resting a hand on her prominent baby bump, before her gaze locked onto Leo. She looked at my son with an expression of pure, unfiltered disgust. She sighed loudly enough to completely silence the conversations around us. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, and pointed a manicured finger directly toward my side of the table. "Look at him," she said, her voice ringing sharp and clear through the dining room. "He might as well be dead. It is all due to your bad parenting and faulty genes, Camille." The entire table fell completely silent. The clinking of silverware stopped instantly. I felt the blood freeze in my veins. My 6-year-old son, who had nearly died because of my parents' gross negligence, was sitting right there listening to his aunt say he would be better off dead. I looked at Thomas and Diane, fully expecting them to immediately reprimand her to demand a swift apology for speaking so horrifically to an innocent child. Instead, my mother let out a nervous little laugh and reached over to pat Nia on the arm. "Now let us not get worked up," my mother said soothingly to Nia. "Pregnancy hormones can make us all a little blunt." "Camille, you know Nia is just concerned about the family image," my father chimed in, crossing his arms and looking at me sternly. "Do not cause a scene, Camille. Nia is carrying the new grandson, and she needs a stress-free environment. Your son's medical issues have been very disruptive to the family lately. You need to stop being so sensitive and learn to take some constructive criticism." They were actually defending her. My own parents were actively justifying the cruelest, most evil remark anyone could ever say about a child, simply because Nia was pregnant with the golden child's son. The sheer audacity and malice in their words hung in the air, suffocating me. I looked over at Jason, who just sat back, smirked, and took a slow sip of his wine, clearly enjoying my public humiliation. In that exact moment, every illusion I had ever held about my family shattered into a million irreversible pieces. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not throw my crystal wine glass across the room or slam my fists onto the table to demand a basic level of human decency. In the past, I might have begged for an apology or tried to explain why wishing death upon a 6-year-old child was an unforgivable offense. But as I looked at the smug satisfaction radiating from Jason's face and the expectant, dismissive smirks of my parents, I realized something profound. You cannot negotiate with people who find entertainment in your pain. I slowly pushed my heavy wooden dining chair back from the table. The loud grating scrape of wood against the polished hardwood floor cut sharply through the sudden silence in the room. I stood up and reached behind my back, untying the linen apron I had been wearing to help my mother serve her lavish anniversary roast. I let the fabric drop carelessly onto the back of my chair, a physical surrender of my role as the family servant. "Camille, sit down," my father commanded, using his absolute authority tone. He pointed his silver fork at me. "Do not ruin your mother's anniversary dinner with one of your dramatic exits. You are acting like a spoiled child." I did not even grant him the respect of eye contact. I turned my attention entirely to my daughter. "Mia, sweetheart, put your crayons down. We are going home." Mia, always deeply sensitive to the shifting moods in the room, immediately dropped her crayon and slid out of her tall dining chair. She hurried over to my side, grabbing handfuls of my dress. I bent down and carefully scooped up Leo. He felt so incredibly light in my arms, his small, fragile chest rising and falling with the continuous help of his portable oxygen concentrator. I carefully adjusted the strap of his medical machine over my shoulder, ensuring the tubing was secure. I held him tightly against my chest, shielding him from the toxic energy radiating from the people sitting just feet away. "Oh, let her go, Thomas!" my mother scoffed, picking up her champagne flute and taking a slow, delicate sip. "She will call us tomorrow, crying and apologizing when she realizes she is overreacting. She always comes crawling back when she needs something." "Exactly," Nia chimed in, her voice dripping with fake pity and unfiltered malice. "She just cannot handle the truth about her own life. Let her run away and play the victim. It is all she is good at." I walked past the mahogany table without a single glance backward. I did not defend my son's right to live because their opinions no longer held any value in my reality. I guided Mia through the grand marble foyer and stopped at the coat closet. I helped Mia into her small pink winter jacket and wrapped Leo tightly in his heavy fleece blanket, making absolutely sure his oxygen tubing remained perfectly straight and unkinked. My father called out from the dining room one last time, his voice echoing down the hall. "If you walk out that door, Camille, do not expect us to bail you out when those medical bills start piling up again. You are on your own." It was his ultimate weapon, the constant threat of financial ruin. What he completely failed to realize was that my medical design business was already thriving. I was secretly making more money than I had ever made in my life, and I no longer needed a single dime of his money or a shred of his approval. I opened the heavy oak front door and stepped out into the biting cold of the Chicago night. The crisp, freezing winter air hit my face instantly, clearing my lungs of the suffocating toxicity I had just left behind. I walked down the long paved driveway toward my car, my footsteps crunching softly against the light layer of frost on the ground. I carefully buckled Leo into his car seat, making sure his oxygen concentrator was locked securely right beside him. I tucked Mia into her booster seat and handed her a small plush bear to hold. "Are we in trouble, Mommy?" Mia asked, her large brown eyes wide with worry in the dim light of the car interior. "No, my sweet girl," I whispered, leaning in to kiss her warm forehead. "We are completely safe. Nobody is in trouble. We are just going to start a brand new adventure." I closed the rear doors and climbed into the driver's seat. The quiet hum of the engine starting and the soft glowing warmth of the dashboard lights felt like a private sanctuary. But I did not put the car in drive immediately. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out my smartphone. I opened my contacts list and stared at the names that had dictated my entire existence. First, I found my mother's name, Diane. I selected her contact and hit block. I felt an immediate small release of pressure in my chest. Next was my father, Thomas. Block. Then came my older brother Jason and his incredibly cruel wife Nia. Block and block. I did not stop there. I went through my social media accounts and severed every digital tie to them. I removed them from my emergency contact lists. I deleted their email addresses from my phone. I blocked their landlines and their business numbers. In less than 2 minutes, I had completely erased my biological family from my digital life. There would be no tearful voicemails, no manipulative text messages, and no guilt-tripping emails. The silence I was choosing was absolute. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the grand North Shore mansion. I did not look in the rearview mirror as the heavy iron gates closed behind me. As I merged onto the highway heading toward downtown Chicago, the city lights painted the night sky in brilliant shades of gold and silver. The rhythmic sound of Leo's breathing machine from the back seat was a constant, steady reminder of exactly what I was fighting for. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles turning white. I made a silent, unbreakable vow right there in the dark. I would build an empire so incredibly high and so powerful that my family could never reach us again. I would never allow them to look down on my children or make them feel less than perfectly loved. I was entirely done being the backup plan, the scapegoat, and the punching bag. I was going to become untouchable, and I was going to give my children the world. 6 months of absolute unbroken silence is a beautiful thing. It gives you the space to breathe and the clarity to rebuild. I channeled every single ounce of the anger and betrayal I felt that night into my business. My company, located on the 40th floor of a sleek glass high-rise in downtown Chicago, had become my ultimate fortress. The modern open-concept space with its clean lines and panoramic views of the city skyline was the exact opposite of my parents' suffocating antique-filled mansion. Here there was no toxic hierarchy and no golden child. There was only hard work, innovation, and undeniable results. My team and I specialized in creating highly accurate three-dimensional anatomical models used by surgeons for complex preoperative planning. We had spent the last 3 months locked in aggressive, intense negotiations with one of the largest national hospital systems in the country. Today, all those late nights and endless presentations officially paid off. We had just quietly closed a contract worth $45 million. It was a monumental achievement that firmly cemented my company as an industry leader. I stood in the center of our bright, bustling office, holding a simple glass of sparkling cider. My core team of designers and engineers were gathered around me, cheering and clapping. There were no arrogant speeches or forced performative toasts like the ones I grew up enduring at my parents' dinner parties. This was real, earned success shared with people who actually respected me. I took a sip of my cider and looked over at the digital photo frame sitting on my pristine glass desk. It displayed a recent picture of Leo and Mia running through a sunlit park. Leo was breathing perfectly on his own, no longer tethered to his portable oxygen machine. His cheeks were rosy, and his smile was wide and carefree. I had kept my silent promise to them. We were safe, and we were thriving. As the small office celebration started winding down, and my team happily returned to their workstations, the direct private line on my desk phone rang. Very few people had access to that specific number. Usually it was my lead developer or a high-level hospital administrator calling to discuss technical specifications. I walked over to my desk and picked up the receiver, expecting to hear the familiar voice of our new client, ready to finalize the implementation schedule. Instead, the voice on the other end of the line belonged to a man who sounded hesitant and deeply concerned. He asked if he was speaking to Camille. I confirmed my identity, keeping my professional tone intact, and asked how I could help him. He cleared his throat and introduced himself as Mr. Bennett, a school counselor at Oak Creek Elementary. The name of the school immediately triggered a sharp warning bell in my mind. Oak Creek was the elite, highly exclusive elementary school, located just a few miles from my parents' sprawling estate. It was the exact school my brother Jason and his wife Nia sent their children to. My stomach tightened, and my grip on the phone grew firm. For a fraction of a second, I wondered if my family had somehow found a manipulative way to bypass my strict digital blockade and use the school administration to reach me. I braced myself, expecting to hear one of my parents demanding that I end my ridiculous silent treatment. But Mr. Bennett quickly clarified his reason for calling, and it immediately shattered my defensive assumptions. He was not reaching out on behalf of Thomas, Diane, Jason, or Nia. He was calling because of a highly unusual and deeply troubling situation involving a specific student. His voice dropped to a careful, hushed whisper as he explained that he was looking at a 10-year-old boy sitting quietly in his office right at this very moment. The boy was Trey. Trey was Nia's biological son from a previous relationship, a quiet, highly observant child whom Jason had formally adopted shortly after marrying Nia. While Jason and Nia paraded around playing the roles of perfect wealthy parents, Trey always seemed to linger in the background, watching the family dynamics with eyes that were far too serious for a child his age. When I was still attending family gatherings, I used to sneak Trey extra desserts or sit with him in the garden when the adult conversations grew too loud or toxic. He was a sweet boy who never quite fit into the aggressive mold my parents and brother demanded. Mr. Bennett explained that Trey had come into his counseling office during the morning recess period, looking exhausted and terrified. The counselor told me he was violating several strict school protocols by making this phone call without contacting the child's legal guardians first, but the situation was entirely unprecedented. Trey had specifically and desperately begged the school not to call Jason or Nia. Instead, the 10-year-old boy had handed the counselor a piece of paper with my office number written on it and pleaded with him to find Aunt Camille. Mr. Bennett took a shaky breath over the phone and told me that Trey had hidden something inside his desk and I needed to see it immediately. I asked him to explain exactly what happened. My voice remained steady, but my heart began to hammer against my ribs. Mr. Bennett told me that Trey had asked to use his office to take a makeup math test during the recess period. The counselor had stepped out for just a few minutes to speak with another teacher in the hallway. When he returned, Trey was sitting rigidly at the desk, staring blankly at the wall. It was only after Trey had gone back to his classroom that Mr. Bennett opened his top desk drawer to put away some files. Right there, sitting on top of his folders, was a piece of crumpled lined notebook paper. It had been folded over several times and taped shut with a piece of clear Scotch tape. Written across the front in shaky, uneven handwriting were the words, "For Mr. Bennett, only please help." The counselor told me his hands were actually shaking as he described the contents of the letter over the phone. He said he had been an educator for 20 years and had dealt with difficult family situations before, but he had never seen a child from a supposedly wealthy, prominent family express this level of sheer terror. "I need to see what he wrote," I said, my protective instincts instantly overriding the strict boundary I had built around myself. I could not just hang up and ignore a child in distress. Mr. Bennett agreed. He explained that due to strict privacy and child protection laws, he was using a secure, encrypted school portal to send me the scanned images of the letter. He told me he was technically required to contact Child Protective Services immediately given the nature of the allegations, but Trey had become completely hysterical when the idea of foster care was brought up. Trey had begged the counselor to contact me first. The boy had somehow remembered my office phone number from a business card he had taken from my purse at a family dinner over a year ago. He kept it hidden inside his shoe all this time. That detail alone broke my heart. A 10-year-old boy carrying my business card in his shoe like a lifeline because he knew the adults in his own house were entirely unsafe. A sharp ping from my computer monitor signaled the arrival of the secure email. I instructed Mr. Bennett to stay on the line while I opened the file. I clicked the link, entered the temporary passcode he provided, and waited for the high-resolution image to load on my screen. The image that appeared was a scanned piece of wide-ruled notebook paper. The paper was visibly wrinkled and covered in smeared water spots that were undeniably dried tears. The handwriting was erratic, pressing so hard into the paper in some places that the pencil lead had nearly torn through the page. I leaned closer to my monitor and began to read. "Aunt Camille, if you get this, please come get me. Please, do not call my mom or Jason. If they know I told, they will lock me in the basement room again. They said you were a bad person who ran away, but I know you are nice because you used to give me food at the big house. I am so hungry all the time now." I felt a cold chill wash over my entire body. I gripped the edge of my glass desk, my knuckles turning white. I continued reading the messy, heartbreaking words. "They only buy food for the new baby and for their fancy parties. When the fancy people come over, they make me wear a nice suit and stand in the living room and smile. But when the people leave, they take the suit off and put it back in plastic so it stays perfect. They took all the money from my special bank account that my real dad left me. I heard them fighting about it. Jason yelled that he needed my money to pay a margin call, whatever that is. Mom yelled back that she needed it for her new bags, because they have an image to maintain. They told me if I tell anyone at school I am hungry, they will call the police and tell them I am a bad kid and send me to a place where bad kids go to get beaten up. Please, Aunt Camille, you are the only one who got away from them. I want to get away too." I stopped reading and stared at the screen. The silence in my office was deafening. The sleek, beautiful empire I had built around myself felt entirely insignificant compared to the raw, terrified plea of a 10-year-old boy trapped in a house of horrors. Jason and Nia were projecting an image of absolute perfection to the outside world. They were attending galas, posting perfectly curated photos of their new baby, and living in a multi-million-dollar home. But beneath that glossy, expensive facade, they were starving a child and stealing his future to fund their lavish lifestyle. They were using fear and psychological torture to keep him quiet. "Are you still there, Camille?" Mr. Bennett asked, his voice breaking the heavy silence on the line. "I am here," I replied, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. I could feel the fury rising in my chest, hot and sharp. This was not the chaotic, defensive anger I used to feel when my parents belittled me. This was a completely different kind of anger. This was the cold, calculated fury of a mother who realizes a child is being actively destroyed by monsters. "I need to know his physical condition," I demanded. "Tell me exactly how he looked today." Mr. Bennet let out a heavy sigh. He looks incredibly small, Camille. He is wearing expensive designer clothes, but they are hanging off his frame. His cheeks are hollow. He flinches every time a door closes too loudly. I wanted to give him a snack from the cafeteria, but he refused. He said if he comes home with food on his breath, Nia will smell it and punish him for taking charity. My blood ran cold. The sheer level of psychological manipulation required to make a starving child refuse food out of fear was beyond comprehension. Jason and Nia had crossed a line that I could not simply ignore. I had promised myself I would never let my biological family back into my life. I had built a massive wall to keep their toxicity away from my own children. But Trey was an innocent casualty trapped behind enemy lines. I could not abandon him the way my parents had abandoned me. I need you to keep him in your office, Mr. Bennet. I instructed, my mind rapidly shifting into strategic planning mode. Do not let him go back to his classroom, and under no circumstances do you allow Jason or Nia to pick him up from school today. Tell the administration he is feeling ill and needs to remain in the clinic area. I cannot hold him here indefinitely without notifying the legal guardians, Camille, the counselor warned, sounding panicked. School policy dictates that we must inform parents of any health or behavioral concerns. If they show up at the dismissal bell, I have no legal authority to keep him from them. You leave the legal authority to me, I said firmly. I am not going to let them take him back to that house. Just keep him safe for the next few hours. I will handle the rest. I hung up the phone and stared at the tear-stained letter on my screen one last time. The strict no-contact rule I had enforced for the past 6 months was officially over. But I was not going to call Jason and Nia and engage in a screaming match. I knew exactly how my family operated. They thrived on chaos, manipulation, and gaslighting. If I confronted them directly, they would simply deny everything, hide the evidence, and punish Trey for reaching out. If I was going to break my silence and step back into their toxic world, I was going to do it with overwhelming, undeniable power. I was going to dismantle their perfect facade piece by piece, and I was going to make sure they never had the opportunity to hurt that little boy ever again. I picked up my cell phone and bypassed my blocked contacts list. Instead, I opened my private directory and searched for a very specific number. It was time to find out exactly what Jason and Nia were hiding behind their closed doors. The drive from my downtown high-rise to the West Loop took exactly 18 minutes, but my mind processed 1,000 different scenarios along the way. Every maternal instinct in my body was screaming at me to drive straight to Oak Creek Elementary, to snatch Trey out of that counselor office and speed away. I wanted to storm into Jason and Nia's sprawling mansion and tear it apart with my bare hands. But I knew exactly how my family operated. They were masters of manipulation and architects of false realities. If I acted impulsively and called the police or Child Protective Services right now, Jason would simply flash his checkbook and leverage his status. Nia would play the role of the exhausted pregnant mother dealing with a troubled stepson who tells lies for attention. Thomas and Diane would undoubtedly swoop in with their high-priced lawyers to completely gaslight the authorities. Trey would be labeled a problem child, and the moment the police left, he would be punished worse than ever before. I could not afford a single misstep. If I was going to strike, I had to completely disarm them first. I needed undeniable, irrefutable proof of their financial and domestic crimes. I pulled my car into a discreet underground parking garage beneath a converted brick warehouse. This was the office of Elias Thorne. Elias was not a typical private investigator who chased cheating spouses in cheap sedans. He was a former federal forensic accountant who specialized in piercing corporate veils and dismantling fraudulent financial empires. He catered exclusively to high-net-worth clients who needed absolute discretion and surgical precision. I had utilized his services once before, when a rival medical tech firm tried to steal my proprietary designs. I knew he was ruthless and I knew he was fast, The elevator brought me directly to his private floor. Elias was waiting in his office, sitting behind a heavy reclaimed wood desk. He was a sharp, observant man who rarely wasted time on pleasantries. He took one look at my face and immediately closed the file he was currently reviewing. He asked me what was wrong. I did not bother sitting down. I walked straight to his desk and handed him a secure tablet displaying the scanned image of Trey's desperate tear-stained letter. I watched his eyes track back and forth across the screen. The professional detachment on his face hardened into something much colder as he read the words of a starving 10-year-old boy. When he finished, he placed the tablet gently on the desk and looked up at me. He asked if the local authorities had been notified. I told him the school counselor was holding the boy safely in the clinic under the guise of an illness, but we were running out of time. I explained that I did not want a standard wellness check because my family would effortlessly manipulate the system. I told Elias I wanted a complete and total financial autopsy of my brother Jason and his wife Nia. I needed to know exactly how a couple living in a $10 million estate was starving a child while continuing to attend high society galas. Elias pulled a fresh legal pad toward him and picked up his pen. I laid out the exact parameters of the investigation. I told him to pull Jason's corporate tax filings, his personal bank accounts, and especially his cryptocurrency wallets. The letter mentioned Jason screaming about a margin call. Jason had always been arrogant, constantly chasing quick, massive wealth to impress our parents. If he had leveraged his assets in a volatile market and gotten hit with a margin call, he would be desperate for immediate liquid cash. I then instructed Elias to look deep into Nia's spending habits over the last 12 months. Since she became pregnant with the new baby, her social media had been a relentless parade of designer bags, exclusive resort vacations, and luxury purchases. I needed to know where that money was coming from. Most importantly, I told him to track down the special bank account Trey mentioned in his letter. The boy's biological father had passed away years ago and left behind a trust fund specifically designated for Trey's education and future. If Jason and Nia had illegally accessed a protected trust belonging to a minor, we had them on federal embezzlement charges. Elias wrote quickly, his expression grim. He warned me that accessing certain sealed financial records required navigating complex legal gray areas. I pulled out my company checkbook, signed a blank retainer check, and slid it across the desk. I told him I did not care about the cost or the methods. I authorized an unlimited budget for this deep dive. I needed to know where every single cent of that child's money went, and I needed to know what other debts were crushing them. Before turning to leave, I added one final target to his list. I told him to investigate my parents, Thomas and Diane. They had spent my entire life bailing Jason out of his reckless mistakes. If Jason was truly drowning in catastrophic debt, he would have undoubtedly gone to them for a rescue. I needed to know if my parents had transferred significant assets to him recently, or if they were financially entangled in his current collapse. I needed the entire web of their finances mapped out clearly so I could see exactly where the structural weaknesses were. Elias assured me he had the network and the resources to pull public filings, property liens, and offshore movements faster than anyone else in Chicago. He promised me a preliminary report within 24 hours. He understood the absolute urgency of the situation because a child's safety was actively hanging in the balance. I left the office and walked back to the elevator, my mind operating with total icy clarity. The air in the underground garage was cold, but I did not feel it. I got back into my car and gripped the steering wheel. The agonizing wait was about to begin, but I took comfort in knowing that the machinery of their destruction was now officially in motion. I had spent my entire life watching them use money and influence to crush anyone who stood in their way. Now I was going to use those exact same weapons to strip them bare. The agonizing wait ended exactly 24 hours later, when a highly encrypted file arrived in my private email inbox. I immediately locked my office door, closed the blinds to the glass walls, and sat down at my desk. Elias was worth every single penny I had paid him. He had completely bypassed the glossy social media posts and the carefully curated public image my family projected. He had performed a surgical financial autopsy on Jason and Nia, and the results were absolutely devastating. As I scrolled through the pages of bank records and offshore tracking data, the true depth of their depravity became sickeningly clear. Jason, the arrogant golden child, who always thought he was smarter than everyone else, had completely destroyed himself. He had taken out massive high-interest loans to leverage a position in a highly volatile cryptocurrency market. He wanted to get unimaginably rich overnight to impress our parents and maintain his status as the family genius. But the market had crashed. Jason was hit with a catastrophic margin call that wiped out his entire portfolio in a matter of hours. His net worth had literally vanished into thin air, leaving him with millions of dollars in aggressive, crushing debt. But instead of facing reality and downsizing their lifestyle, Nia chose to double down on the illusion. She could not bear the thought of her elite country club friends finding out they were broke. She needed to maintain the image of the wealthy, successful wife at all costs. To do that, she needed immediate liquid cash. The report detailed exactly where she found it. Elias had uncovered the bank records for Trey's protected trust fund. The boy's biological father had left behind a substantial account specifically designed to cover his future college education and medical needs. Nia and Jason had illegally forged guardianship documents to bypass the trust protections, and they drained the entire account dry. Hundreds of thousands of dollars meant for an innocent child's future had been systematically stolen to fund Nia's relentless luxury shopping sprees. Every time she posted a picture of a new designer handbag or showcased the lavish imported furniture for her new baby's nursery, she was actively stealing from her own 10-year-old son. And the darkest, most evil part of their scheme was how they treated Trey behind closed doors. To punish him for existing and to cut down on their daily household expenses, Nia had literally stopped feeding him. They treated the boy like a worthless burden while showering their new biological baby with excess. They starved him, locked him away from guests, and terrorized him into silence to protect their fake upper-class lifestyle. I felt physically sick reading the clinical breakdown of their abuse, but the report was not finished. I turned to the section regarding my parents, Thomas and Diane. They had spent my entire life shielding Jason from the consequences of his actions, and they had done it again. Elias uncovered a heavily guarded financial secret that my parents had hidden from their social circle. To save their golden child from federal fraud charges and total bankruptcy, Thomas and Diane had secretly taken out a massive second mortgage on their historic North Shore mansion. They had liquidated their own retirement accounts and drained their stock portfolios to throw cash into Jason's sinking ship. They had leveraged their entire perfect life to the absolute maximum and were now teetering on the edge of foreclosure themselves just to maintain the family image. But even with my parents sacrificing everything they owned, Jason was still drowning. He had needed one final massive bridge loan to keep his creditors at bay. Elias tracked this final debt to a private equity holding firm. I stared at my computer screen, my heart pounding against my ribs as I read the name of the firm. It was a subsidiary company connected to an old family trust established by my grandfather decades ago. My father had completely ignored this specific trust for years, assuming it was dormant and practically empty. He had always been too arrogant to look into the details. But 3 years ago, my corporate lawyers had advised me to diversify my assets. I had legally and completely anonymously taken over the CO management of that exact trust, restructuring it into a highly profitable private lending firm. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. Jason, in his blind, desperate panic to secure funds, had unknowingly borrowed millions of dollars from a company I controlled. I owned his debt. I was his principal creditor. I held the deed to his ruin. With a single phone call to my legal team, I could call in the debt freeze every single asset he had left and legally crush his entire fake empire. I held their complete destruction in the palm of my hand. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing as I began to formulate a flawless legal strategy to trap them and secure custody of Trey. But before I could even pick up a pen, my private office line rang sharply. I grabbed the receiver. It was Elias, and his typically calm, detached voice was tight with urgency. He told me to drop everything immediately. He had placed a discreet surveillance team outside Oak Creek Elementary just to keep an eye on Trey's movements. Elias said an ambulance had just pulled into the school parking lot with its sirens blaring. Trey had collapsed in the middle of the main hallway. The school nurse reported that his body had simply given out from severe starvation and extreme exhaustion. The paramedics were loading him onto a stretcher right at that very moment. The cold, calculating businesswoman vanished instantly, replaced entirely by fierce, protective maternal instinct. I slammed the phone down, grabbed my car keys, and ran out of my office. The time for silent observation was over. The drive to Oak Creek Elementary took less than 15 minutes, but every single second felt like an eternity. I did not speed recklessly or drive with blind panic. I navigated the Chicago traffic with a terrifying absolute clarity. The protective rage burning in my chest had frozen into something solid and unbreakable. By the time I turned onto the manicured tree-lined street leading to the elite elementary school, my game plan was locked into place. I was not going to play defense. I was going out for blood. I pulled my car aggressively into the fire lane directly in front of the main administrative building. The flashing red and white lights of a parked ambulance painted the brick walls of the school in a frantic, rhythmic pattern. A few parents who were arriving for early pickup stood on the sidewalk whispering and pointing. I ignored them entirely. I slammed my car door shut and sprinted toward the entrance, just as the heavy double doors swung open. Two paramedics were carefully guiding a rolling stretcher down the ramp. My breath caught in my throat. Lying on the stark white gurney was Trey. He looked so incredibly fragile, his pale skin contrasting sharply with the dark, expensive fabric of his private school uniform. Mr. Bennett, the school counselor, walked closely beside him, looking pale and deeply distressed. I moved to intercept them, but the screech of heavy tires tearing into the parking lot shattered the quiet suburban atmosphere. A massive rented black luxury SUV jerked to a violent halt right behind my car, blocking the ambulance path. The driver's side door flew open and Nia stepped out. For a split second, she looked exactly like the wealthy, put-together society wife she pretended to be. She was wearing a pristine white designer trench coat, oversized sunglasses, and a diamond tennis bracelet that caught the afternoon sun. She clutched a limited edition handbag that likely cost more than a year of college tuition. But the illusion completely fell apart the moment she took her first step. She stumbled, her designer heel catching on the pavement. As she recovered and stormed toward the ambulance, the heavy, unmistakable stench of top-shelf vodka and stale mints rolled off her in waves. It was not even 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and my brother's pregnant wife was heavily intoxicated. She had likely been day drinking at some exclusive country club luncheon, while her stepson was literally starving to death in a school hallway. "What the hell is going on here?" Nia shrieked, her voice shrill and wildly out of control. Her eyes darted from the paramedics to the stretcher and then locked directly onto me. The fake maternal concern she usually projected to the world vanished instantly, replaced by sheer raw panic. She knew that if Trey was taken to a hospital, the doctors would immediately identify the severe malnutrition. Her perfect facade would be destroyed. Nia lunged toward the stretcher, shoving past Mr. Bennett with shocking force. "Where do you think you are taking my son?" she demanded aggressively, blocking the paramedic's path to the ambulance doors. "Put him down right now. He is just acting out for attention. He does not need a hospital. Ma'am, your son has collapsed from severe exhaustion and requires immediate medical evaluation," the lead paramedic stated calmly, trying to maneuver around her. "We need to transport him to pediatric emergency." "I said absolutely not!" Nia screamed, her face contorting with rage. "I am his mother, and I am refusing medical transport. I will take him home in my car. He is just being dramatic." Trey whimpered from the stretcher, turning his small face away from her. His tiny hand reached out weakly, gripping the edge of the safety rail. I did not hesitate for another second. I stepped directly between Nia and the stretcher, using my own body as a physical shield to block her access to the child. "Do not take another step toward him," I warned, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that carried clearly across the parking lot. Nia recoiled for a fraction of a second, genuinely startled by my sudden intervention. Then her eyes narrowed into venomous slits. "You!" she spat, her voice dripping with absolute contempt. "What the hell are you doing here, Camille? You have zero right to be anywhere near my family. Get out of my way before I have you arrested for trespassing." I stood my ground, my posture completely rigid and unyielding. "I am not going anywhere, Nia. And neither is he. He is getting into that ambulance right now." Nia threw her head back and let out a loud theatrical laugh, turning to the gathering crowd of school administrators and the school resource officer who had just jogged out of the building. "Look at this lunatic," Nia announced, gesturing wildly at me with her manicured hand. "This is my estranged sister-in-law. She is mentally unstable. She has not spoken to our family in months because she is incredibly jealous of my life. Now she is showing up at my son's school trying to kidnap him." She turned her furious gaze back to the school resource officer, pointing an accusing finger directly at my chest. "Officer, arrest this woman. She has absolutely no legal right to be here. I am his legal guardian, and I demand that you remove her from these premises immediately." The school resource officer, a tall, imposing man with a serious expression, stepped forward, resting his hand on his utility belt. He looked from Nia's erratic, aggressive posturing to my calm, icy stance. "Ma am he?" addressed me respectfully but firmly. "Is it true that you do not have legal guardianship of this child?" Nia smirked, crossing her arms over her chest triumphantly. "See? I told you," she sneered. "She is a complete fraud. She has no papers, no rights, and no business touching my son. Tell the paramedics to release him to me right now." I did not raise my voice. I did not argue or attempt to match her chaotic, frantic energy. I simply kept my eyes locked on the police officer, holding his gaze with absolute, unwavering authority. I let Nia's shrill, drunken accusations hang in the air for everyone to hear, allowing her to dig her own grave right there on the pavement. She was so blinded by her own arrogance and desperation that she had completely forgotten how meticulously my brother and I used to handle family business. She thought she held all the legal cards. She thought her status as his adoptive mother gave her absolute power to drag him back to that house of horrors. I slowly unclasped the leather flap of my professional briefcase, keeping my movements deliberate and precise. I had anticipated every single one of her manipulative tactics the entire drive over. I was not just a concerned aunt rushing to a school parking lot. I was a fully armed executioner ready to dismantle her completely. The silver clasp of my briefcase yielded with a sharp, heavy click. I reached inside and retrieved a thick manila folder, passing it directly to the school resource officer. I ignored Nia completely, keeping my eyes locked on the officer as he opened the file. Inside that folder is a preliminary report compiled by a former federal forensic accountant, I stated clearly. It details a severe and intentional pattern of child neglect. The boy on that stretcher is suffering from advanced malnutrition. He has been systematically starved by the woman screaming behind me while she illegally drains his protected trust fund to support her shopping habits. Nia lunged forward, attempting to snatch the folder out of the officer's hands. He stepped back swiftly, raising his arm to block her advance. He instructed her to stand down in a voice that brooked no argument. Nia was panting heavily, the smell of alcohol becoming even more pronounced as she lost her physical composure. "That is a complete lie," she shrieked, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at me. "She forged those documents. I am his mother. You have to listen to me. I demand you give me my son right now." I reached into my briefcase a second time. This was the moment I had been waiting for. This was the exact legal loophole Jason had blindly left open years ago. When Jason first adopted Trey, he was obsessed with projecting the image of a responsible, wealthy patriarch. During a month-long international business trip to secure foreign investors, he realized he needed someone reliable to manage any potential emergencies stateside. Nia was too busy attending high-society galas and luxury spa retreats to be bothered with practical parenting duties. Jason had rushed into my office and shoved a stack of legal documents across my desk, demanding I sign them. Among those papers was a comprehensive, fully notarized emergency medical proxy and temporary guardianship directive. It granted me absolute legal authority to make all medical and welfare decisions for Trey in Jason's absence. Jason was incredibly arrogant and exceptionally lazy. When he returned from that trip, he completely forgot about the paperwork. He never filed the necessary legal forms to revoke my status. As far as the state of Illinois was concerned, I was still a fully authorized legal guardian, capable of making unilateral emergency medical decisions for Trey. I pulled the heavy, crisp document from my briefcase. The golden notary seal caught the afternoon sunlight as I handed it to the officer. "This is a fully executed, unrevoked emergency medical proxy," I announced, my voice carrying absolute authority. "It is signed by Jason, the child's legally adoptive father. It grants me comprehensive power of attorney over Trey's medical care. As his authorized legal guardian, I am overriding this woman's refusal of care." Nia stared at the document as if it were a venomous snake, the blood entirely drained from her face. She recognized Jason's signature instantly. The realization that her own husband's sloppy arrogance had just stripped her of her power hit her like a physical blow. "You cannot do this!" Nia stammered, her voice losing its aggressive edge and descending into sheer panic. "That paper is old. It does not count anymore. I am his mother. I am the one in charge here." The school resource officer carefully reviewed the dates and the notarization stamp on the proxy. He cross-referenced the names with the disturbing medical neglect report I had just provided. He looked up from the papers and fixed Nia with a hardened glare. "Ma'am, this document is legally binding," the officer stated firmly. "It has never been revoked. Combined with the severe physical condition of the child and the documented allegations of severe neglect, I am recognizing this woman's authority to take over this situation." Nia let out a guttural scream of frustration. She took another aggressive step toward the paramedics, her hands balling into fists. "I am not letting her take my son. I will sue this entire school. I will destroy all of you." The officer immediately unclipped his radio and stepped directly into Nia's path, closing the distance between them. His tolerance for her drunken, erratic behavior had completely evaporated. He pointed a stern finger directly at her face. "If you take one more step toward that child, I will place you under arrest for obstruction of justice and public intoxication," the officer warned, his voice booming across the parking lot. "You are currently interfering with a critical medical emergency. I have documented evidence of child endangerment in my hands. If you do not back away right now, you will be leaving this school in the back of my cruiser." Nia froze. The threat of being arrested in broad daylight in front of the elite parents of Oak Creek Elementary was the only thing capable of piercing through her alcohol-fueled rage. She cared more about her public image than anything else in the world. Being handcuffed in front of the other wealthy mothers would permanently destroy her social standing. She slowly lowered her hands, her chest heaving as she glared at me with undisguised hatred. She took a staggering step backward, defeated by her own vanity and her husband's careless legal mistakes. The lead paramedic approached me with a clipboard. He explained that Trey's vitals were stable enough for now, but he desperately needed a quiet, safe environment and immediate sustained nutrition. Trey was visibly trembling on the stretcher, clinging to the thin blanket. He looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes and begged me not to let them take him to a loud public hospital where Jason could easily find him. He was absolutely paralyzed by the fear that his abusers would track him down in a busy emergency room. I looked down at the brave little boy who had risked everything to reach out to me. I made a split-second decision to protect his mental state as fiercely as his physical health. I used my newly validated proxy to sign the emergency medical release forms right there in the parking lot, taking full legal and physical custody of Trey on the spot. I assured the paramedics and the school officer that I was transporting him directly to my private concierge pediatrician, who was already on standby. Nia watched in silent, seething fury as I gently lifted Trey from the stretcher. He wrapped his incredibly thin arms around my neck, burying his face into my shoulder. I carried him away from the flashing lights and away from the woman who had systematically starved him. I walked him straight toward the safety of my own car, leaving Nia standing alone in the parking lot, surrounded by the wreckage of her own arrogance. The heavy door of my SUV closed with a solid, reassuring thud, instantly cutting off the chaotic noise of the school parking lot. Inside the insulated cabin, the air was quiet and secure. I quickly walked around the front of the vehicle, keeping my posture completely straight, and my expression entirely unbothered by the spectacle Nia was still attempting to cause on the pavement. I climbed into the driver's seat and locked the doors, securing our perimeter. I glanced over at Trey, who was sitting in the passenger seat. He had pulled his knees up to his chest, making himself as small as physically possible. The expensive fabric of his private school uniform hung off his emaciated frame like a borrowed costume. He was trembling violently, not from the crisp Chicago air, but from the sheer adrenaline and terror coursing through his small body. I turned the heating vents directly toward him and cranked the warm air to maximum. "You are completely safe now, Trey," I said, my voice soft but layered with absolute certainty. "Nobody is going to follow us. Nobody is going to take you back to that house. I am taking you straight to my home." He stared at the dashboard, his breathing shallow and rapid. I reached out and gently placed my hand over his. His skin was freezing cold to the touch, and his knuckles were bruised, a stark physical reminder of the neglect he had endured. I promised him that as soon as we arrived, he could have a long hot bath and sleep in a real bed. I told him my kitchen was fully stocked, and he could have absolutely anything he wanted to eat. I expected him to ask for pizza or ice cream, something a normal 10-year-old boy would crave after being deprived. Instead, he looked at me with hollow, terrified eyes and asked if he could just have a small piece of plain bread. He promised he would eat it over the sink so he would not drop any crumbs. He said he did not want to be a burden or make a mess because that always made Nia angry. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, but I forced my expression to remain perfectly calm. I squeezed his hand and told him he could eat wherever he wanted in my house and that he would never have to worry about dropping a crumb again. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the flashing lights of the ambulance and my furious, intoxicated sister-in-law shrinking in the rearview mirror. As we merged onto the main road heading toward the safety of my neighborhood, the tension inside the car did not dissipate. In fact, it seemed to thicken. Trey kept checking the side mirrors, his eyes darting frantically at every dark SUV that pulled up behind us in traffic. His anxiety was escalating, reaching a fever pitch. He suddenly uncrossed his arms and gripped my hand with a desperate, surprising strength. "Aunt Camille, you do not understand," he whispered, his voice cracking with pure panic. "You do not know why she was screaming so loud back there. It was not just because she was mad that you took me." I kept my eyes on the road, but gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. "Tell me what you know, Trey. You are safe now. You can tell me everything." He swallowed hard, struggling to get the words out. "They locked me in the basement room again last night because I asked for a glass of water after bedtime. There is an air vent near the ceiling that connects to Jason's home office. I could hear them screaming at each other. They were throwing things and packing boxes. Jason said the bank was going to take the house and they had no cash left to run away." I nodded, encouraging him to continue. My private investigator had already confirmed their total financial ruin, but Trey's first-hand account provided the exact timeline of their desperation. Nia told Jason they had one last way to get a massive amount of cash. Trey continued, a tear finally spilling over his dark lashes and tracing a path down his hollow cheek. "She said they were going to use me. They knew you owned a huge company and had millions of dollars. Nia said because you used to be nice to me, you would be weak when it came to protecting me." The sheer depravity of their scheme began to crystallize in my mind. What exactly were they planning to do? "Trey?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "They were going to call you tomorrow morning." Trey sobbed, his grip on my hand tightening until it hurt. "They were going to demand you wire them $2 million by the end of the week. Jason said it was the only way to pay off the margin call and escape the country. And if I refused to pay them, I prompted, already knowing the answer would be utterly vile." Trey let out a choked gasp, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "They said if you refused, they would drag me back to the house and punish me for ruining their lives. But if you tried to take me without paying them, they had a backup plan. Nia said they would call the local police and the federal authorities and report that you kidnapped me. They were going to claim you broke into the school and snatched me because you are mentally unstable." He paused, struggling to catch his breath. "Nia told Jason that if it came down to it, they would legally surrender their parental rights directly to the state just to spite you. They promised each other they would throw me into the absolute worst foster care system they could find and make sure I was sent to a group home where kids get beaten up every single day. They were going to use my life as a hostage to steal your money." The heavy silence that followed his confession was deafening. I drove through the Chicago suburbs, my mind processing the absolute pure evil of my brother and his wife. They were not just neglecting a child to maintain an upper-class illusion. They were actively weaponizing an innocent 10-year-old boy for a multi-million-dollar ransom. They viewed Trey as nothing more than a disposable bargaining chip, a pawn they could threaten with institutional abuse just to extract cash from my business. They genuinely believed my maternal empathy was a fatal weakness they could easily exploit. I guided my car onto the private tree-lined street leading to my home. I pulled over to the shoulder of the road and shifted the vehicle into park. I turned in my seat and looked directly into Trey's terrified, tear-filled eyes. I reached out and gently wiped the tear from his cheek. "I want you to listen to me very carefully, Trey," I said, projecting every ounce of authority and fierce protection I possessed. "Jason and Nia are never going to touch you again. They are never going to see a single dime of my money, and they are absolutely never going to throw you into a foster home." Trey looked at me, his lower lip trembling. "But they said they have all the legal power. They said they always win." I offered him a cold, calculated smile. "They only win against people who play by their rules, Trey. Tomorrow morning, when they make that phone call, they are going to find out exactly who they are dealing with. I am not the quiet little sister they used to bully, and I am certainly not a weak target." I put the car back into drive and pulled through the heavy iron security gates of my property. The imposing structure of my home rose in the distance, bathed in the warm afternoon sunlight. As we drove up the sweeping driveway, I began mentally preparing my legal team for the extortion call that was coming the next day. Jason and Nia wanted to play a high-stakes game of ransom. I was going to gladly accept their invitation, and then I was going to completely obliterate their entire world. The morning sun reflected harshly off the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of my corporate law firm in downtown Chicago. I had arrived at 7 in the morning, bypassing my usual medical design office entirely. The large mahogany conference table was covered with legal pads, financial documents, and the devastating report compiled by Elias. Sitting across from me was my lead attorney, David, a man known for his ruthless precision in high-stakes litigation. He placed a digital audio recorder in the center of the table and connected it directly to the multi-line speakerphone system. We were ready. At precisely 9 o'clock, the phone rang. The sharp, shrill sound echoed in the quiet conference room. David gave me a silent nod. I reached out and pressed the speaker button, answering the call. "Well, well, well." Jason's voice filled the room. He sounded incredibly smug, his tone dripping with the arrogant confidence of a man who believed he held all the winning cards. "Good morning, little sister. I hear you caused quite a scene at Oak Creek Elementary yesterday." I kept my voice deliberately flat, betraying absolutely no emotion. I responded that I had simply addressed a medical emergency involving his son. A loud scoff echoed through the speaker. It was Nia. She had clearly sobered up from the previous afternoon, but her voice was laced with pure venom. "You overstepped your boundaries, Camille," she snapped. "You took advantage of a paperwork error. That medical proxy is a joke and you know it. We are his legal parents. We have absolute authority over where he goes and what happens to him. You have zero rights to my child." I glanced at David, who silently gestured for me to let them keep talking. I asked them what exactly they wanted. I knew the answer, but I needed them to say it clearly and explicitly on the recorded line. Jason took over the conversation, seamlessly slipping into the slick, persuasive tone he used to secure bad investments. "Look, Camille, we all know you have a soft spot for the kid. You always were overly sensitive. Nia and I are willing to be reasonable here. We are willing to let Trey stay with you temporarily, and we will conveniently forget to press kidnapping charges against you. All it is going to cost you is a small sponsorship donation to our family accounts." I asked him to define a small donation. $2 million, Jason stated smoothly without a single ounce of hesitation. "Wire transferred directly into an offshore routing account I have already set up. I will email you the routing numbers as soon as we hang up. You have until Friday morning to make the deposit." The sheer audacity of the demand hung heavily in the air of the conference room. He had just brazenly demanded $2 million to spare a child from his own abusive home. They were treating a 10-year-old boy like a piece of leverage in a corporate hostage negotiation. "And what happens if I refuse?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper to perfectly mimic the sound of a terrified, cornered woman. Nia let out a cruel, sharp laugh. "If you refuse, we call the Chicago Police Department right now," she threatened, her voice oozing with malicious delight. "We report that you abducted my son from school grounds. Your little medical proxy only covers emergency care, Camille. It does not strip us of our parental rights. The police will show up at your massive house, take Trey away from you, and hand him right back to us." Jason chimed in, his tone turning dark and incredibly vicious. "And once he is back under our roof, things are going to get much worse for him. We will legally surrender our parental rights directly to the state. We will tell the social workers he is severely disturbed and violent. We will make absolutely sure he gets placed in the most overcrowded, underfunded group home in the state system. A soft kid like Trey will not survive a week in a place like that without getting beaten half to death." I gripped the edge of the mahogany table, my fingernails digging into the polished wood. The pure, unadulterated evil radiating from the speakerphone was staggering. They were openly detailing their plan to orchestrate the psychological and physical destruction of an innocent child out of pure spite and greed. They genuinely believed that my maternal empathy was a fatal weakness they could exploit for cash. They assumed that because I loved the boy, I would simply hand over my hard-earned wealth to save him from their sadistic threats. "You have $45 million from that new hospital contract," Jason added, proving that he had been monitoring my business success from afar. $2 million is absolutely nothing to you, Camille. Consider it a cheap price to pay for your peace of mind. If the money is not in my account by Friday, the police will be at your door, and Trey will be gone forever. You know we will do it." He was right about one thing. I knew exactly what they were capable of doing. My family had spent my entire life using fear and manipulation to enforce their will. They were relying on the decades of conditioned submission they had beaten into me. They expected me to fold, to cry, to beg, and ultimately to write the check just to keep the peace. I looked across the table at David. The attorney was staring at the recording device with a look of absolute professional triumph. Jason and Nia had just handed us a perfectly articulated, legally undeniable recorded confession of federal extortion and child endangerment. They had walked blindly into the trap and locked the door behind themselves. I took a deep breath, carefully modulating my voice to sound defeated and utterly broken. I needed to feed their massive egos and give them the exact reaction they craved. I needed them to feel completely victorious so they would let their guard down for what was coming next. I let out a ragged, shaky breath, leaning closer to the speakerphone. I forced my voice to tremble, letting a heavy, wet sob escape my throat. "Please, Jason," I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly. "Please do not hurt him. I will do whatever you want. Just promise me you will leave Trey alone." The sound of Nia's triumphant laughter filled the conference room. It was the exact sound of a predator playing with its food. "I told you she would fold," Nia gloated to Jason in the background. "She is so weak." "I am not weak," I cried out, injecting just enough pathetic desperation into my tone to make it believable. "I just love him. You know I have the money, but pulling $2 million in liquid cash out of my corporate accounts today will trigger a massive federal audit. The banking regulations for medical tech firms are incredibly strict right now. If I initiate a blind wire transfer to an offshore account, the IRS will freeze my entire business portfolio by noon. You will get absolutely nothing." The line went silent for a moment as Jason processed this information. He was a desperate fraudster, but he still understood basic corporate banking triggers. "So how do we do this, Camille?" Jason demanded, his voice losing a fraction of its arrogant gloss. "Because I am not waiting around while your accountants play games. I need that money by Friday." I wiped a non-existent tear from my eye and looked across the table at David, who was watching my performance with quiet professional respect. "There is a loophole," I stammered, acting as though I was frantically searching for a solution to appease my abusers. My company has a $2.5 million philanthropic budget allocated for this quarter. I can write a certified corporate check today and label it as a high-level charitable sponsorship. It bypasses the audit flags entirely. A charity sponsorship, Jason repeated, sounding highly skeptical. Naya is hosting the Children's Hospital Benefit Gala at the Ritz-Carlton this Saturday night, I said, feeding the trap directly to them. If I present the $2 million as a platinum-tier corporate donation to her foundation, the bank releases the funds immediately with 0 red flags. The optics are perfect. It looks like my medical firm is supporting your charity work. You get the money completely clean and untraceable. I could practically hear the gears turning in Nia's head. The sheer vanity of the proposition was an irresistible bait. She was currently bankrupt, facing severe eviction notices, and desperate to maintain her illusion of immense wealth among Chicago's elite. The idea of standing on a brightly lit stage in a custom designer gown, publicly receiving a $2 million oversized check from her defeated sister-in-law, was the ultimate ego boost. It was exactly the kind of high society spectacle she craved more than oxygen itself. Saturday night, Nia said, her voice suddenly breathless with intense, greedy excitement. At the Ritz-Carlton, you will bring a certified corporate check directly to me. Yes, I sobbed, leaning into the microphone and lowering my head. I will bring the check. I will dress up. I will smile for the cameras, and I will hand you the money in front of all your wealthy friends. You will look like the biggest philanthropist in the city. Just please, Jason, I am begging you. Give me until Saturday night and promise you will not call the police on Trey. Jason chuckled, a dark, wet sound that made my skin crawl. See, Camille, was that so hard? All you had to do was learn your place in the family hierarchy. You bring the certified check to the VIP reception at 7 o'clock sharp. You hand it to Nia, you pose for the society photographers, and then you can go back to playing house with my damaged goods of a stepson. Thank you. I whimpered, practicing the submissive, terrified tone they had demanded from me my entire childhood. Thank you, Jason. I will be there. Do not try anything stupid, little sister. Jason warned, his voice hardening into a final vicious threat. I have the police on speed dial. If you show up empty-handed, Trey goes straight to the state ward and you go to jail for kidnapping. We hold all the cards. I know, I cried softly. I know you do. The line clicked dead. The extortion call was officially over. The moment the dial tone echoed through the large glass-walled room, I instantly dropped the terrified, weeping sister act. My spine straightened, and the fake panic vanished from my face completely. I reached out and pressed the end button on the console, cutting the connection. I looked across the mahogany table at David. The digital recording device with its blinking red light sat between us, containing every single second of their vile demands. That was an absolute masterclass, Camille, David said quietly, hitting the stop button on the recorder and pulling the memory card from the device. They swallowed the bait whole. Not only did they confess to federal extortion and child endangerment, but they just willingly invited us to execute the trap in a highly publicized public venue filled with prominent witnesses. I stood up from the heavy leather conference chair and smoothed the invisible wrinkles from my pristine, tailored suit. The adrenaline was pumping fiercely through my veins, but my mind remained remarkably cold and analytical. Jason and Nia genuinely believed they had outsmarted me. They thought my love for an innocent child was a pathetic vulnerability they could easily exploit to fund their luxurious escape from their own financial ruin. They were currently celebrating in their empty, foreclosed mansion, counting the millions they thought they had successfully stolen from my company. What they failed to realize was that they had just given me the exact coordinates, time, and location for their own public execution. They wanted a high society spectacle at the Ritz-Carlton to feed their monstrous egos. I was going to give them a performance they would never ever forget. I instructed David to immediately begin compiling the bankruptcy filings, the embezzlement evidence, and the unedited extortion tape. It was time to coordinate with the federal authorities and prepare the final killing blow. I did not waste a single second basking in the glow of their recorded confession. The moment the dial tone faded from the conference room, the real work began. I looked at David, and we moved with the synchronized precision of a military strike team. We had less than 48 hours until the charity gala at the Ritz-Carlton, and every single piece of our legal snare had to be reinforced with steel. David immediately pulled up the secure digital vault containing the financial autopsy Elias had conducted. We needed to package Jason and Nia's absolute destruction into a neat, undeniable presentation for the federal authorities. I stood beside the large, interactive smartboard as David began dragging and dropping the files into a master timeline of their crimes. We were not just building a defense to protect a child. We were building an impenetrable cage to lock my brother and his wife away for a very long time. First, we established the immediate motive for their desperation by mapping out the cryptocurrency margin call that had completely wiped out Jason's portfolio. Next came the bank records proving they had systematically drained Trey's protected trust fund to maintain their lavish lifestyle. We highlighted the forged guardianship signatures they had used to bypass the bank's security protocols. That specific action escalated their crimes from simple theft to federal wire fraud and embezzlement. Finally, we placed the pristine audio recording of their $2 million extortion demand right at the top of the hierarchy. David picked up his cell phone and dialed a direct number for a contact he had inside the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Prosecutor Office. This was not a situation for a standard police dispatch. We were dealing with multi-million-dollar corporate extortion, interstate wire fraud, and the criminal endangerment of a minor. David put the call on speaker. The federal agent on the line listened in stunned silence as David played a small snippet of Jason, demanding the offshore wire transfer and threatening to throw Trey into a violent group home. The agent immediately agreed that this was a slam-dunk case. Federal authorities love nothing more than a perfectly orchestrated sting operation handed to them on a silver platter. We quickly coordinated the logistics for Saturday night. Plainclothes detectives would infiltrate the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, masquerading as wealthy donors and hotel catering staff. Financial crimes investigators would be stationed at the perimeter, ready to secure the exits. I would play my part perfectly by walking right up to the stage and presenting the certified corporate check. The moment Nia's fingers closed around that piece of paper, the extortion would be legally complete, and the federal agents would swarm the room. By the time we finalized the operational details with the authorities, the sun had fully set over the Chicago skyline. I left the corporate law firm and drove back to my suburban fortress. The house was blissfully quiet when I walked through the front door. The contrast between the violent chaos my family created and the absolute peace I had built for myself was staggering. I checked the guest room first. Trey was sound asleep, his breathing deep and steady, wrapped securely in a thick down comforter. His bruised knuckles rested on top of the blankets. In the next room, Leo and Mia were tangled together in a pile of soft pillows. Seeing them safe solidified the ice running through my veins. Jason and Nia had threatened to destroy this piece. They were going to pay the ultimate price. I walked into my expansive master suite and opened the double doors to my walk-in closet. The soft overhead lighting illuminated rows of designer clothing, but I was not looking for a typical gala gown. Nia would undoubtedly be wearing something incredibly loud, skin-tight, and dripping with flashy sequins to ensure all eyes were on her. She needed to look like the wealthy society queen she was desperately pretending to be. I needed to look like the woman who owned the ground she stood on. I bypassed the silk evening dresses and moved directly to my collection of tailored business wear. My fingers brushed past standard black and navy blazers until I found exactly what I was looking for. It was a custom-tailored, razor-sharp, pristine white power suit. The cut was immaculate, with a structured shoulder and a severe plunging lapel that projected absolute unapologetic authority. It was the kind of outfit worn by a woman who did not need to ask for permission to command a room. It was the armor of an executioner. I pulled the crisp white jacket from its velvet hanger and held it up against myself in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. In my parents' house, I had always been forced to wear muted, forgettable colors. I was taught to blend into the background so Jason could shine. I was conditioned to make myself small so their golden child could feel massive. Those days were entirely over. On Saturday night, I was going to walk into the center of their elite fabricated world, wrapped in stark, undeniable white. I would contrast perfectly against the dark, filthy reality of their crimes. I laid the suit carefully across the velvet ottoman in the center of the closet and selected a pair of stiletto heels that sounded like a gavel striking wood with every step. I did not feel an ounce of fear, anxiety, or hesitation. The trap was flawlessly engineered. The federal agents were briefed and ready. The evidence was secured in an impenetrable digital vault, and my children were safe. I turned off the closet light, leaving the white suit glowing faintly in the shadows. The countdown to the Ritz-Carlton had officially begun. Saturday evening arrived with a biting chill in the air, but the atmosphere inside the Ritz-Carlton ballroom was suffocatingly warm and heavy with manufactured opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a brilliant golden light over dozens of circular tables draped in imported silk. Waitstaff in crisp uniforms navigated through the dense crowd of Chicago elite carrying silver trays of champagne and delicate appetizers. The room buzzed with the low melodic hum of classical music and the hollow networking of the city's wealthiest residents. I stepped through the grand gilded doors and paused at the top of the sweeping staircase. My tailored white power suit felt like a second skin. The severe cut of the blazer and the immaculate trousers projected an absolute unyielding authority. I did not shrink into the background the way my parents had conditioned me to do for 3 decades. I stood tall, surveying the ballroom with the cold, detached precision of an apex predator scanning its hunting ground. It took me less than 10 seconds to locate the targets. Nia was holding court near the main presentation stage. Exactly as I had predicted, she was wearing an incredibly loud, skin-tight emerald green dress, absolutely covered in reflective sequins. It was the kind of garment designed to scream wealth while silently whispering sheer desperation. She clutched a glass of champagne in one hand and laughed theatrically at a joke made by a prominent hospital board member. Jason stood right beside her, projecting the flawless image of a titan of industry. He wore a custom-tailored tuxedo and patted the backs of wealthy investors, completely ignoring the reality that his entire financial existence was a rotting hollow shell. He looked so incredibly arrogant, so blindly confident in his own superiority. A few yards away, I spotted my parents, Thomas and Diane. They were standing by a massive ice sculpture, actively participating in the grand delusion. My mother wore her signature pearls, her posture perfectly rigid as she bragged to a group of surgeons about Jason's incredible philanthropic efforts. My father was nodding along, soaking up the praise and taking full credit for raising such a brilliant, generous son. They were entirely oblivious to the fact that their golden child had secretly bankrupted them and was currently running an extortion ring against their own daughter. I shifted my gaze past my toxic family and looked for the subtle anomalies hidden within the wealthy crowd. The tall man adjusting his tuxedo cuffs near the emergency exit was not a real estate mogul. The 2 women sipping sparkling water by the audio-visual control panel were not socialites. The ballroom had been successfully infiltrated. The federal financial crimes agents were in position, waiting quietly for my signal. I took a deep breath and walked slowly down the grand staircase. The sharp, decisive click of my stiletto heels on the marble steps seemed to cut through the ambient noise of the party. I walked directly toward the center of the room, my pristine white suit contrasting violently with the sea of dark formal wear surrounding me. Nia saw me first. Her loud theatrical smile faltered for a fraction of a second before twisting into a look of absolute greedy triumph. She tapped Jason on the arm and pointed a manicured finger in my direction. They genuinely believed they had won. They looked at my white suit and simply saw a flag of surrender. They thought I was a broken, desperate mother, arriving to buy a child's safety with my hard-earned company funds. Jason leaned over and whispered something to my parents. The 4 of them immediately broke away from their respective conversations and moved toward me like a pack of wolves circling a wounded animal. They intercepted me just as I reached the edge of the central dance floor. Camille Jason said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear his tone dripping with fake brotherly affection. "You actually made it. We were starting to worry you might not show up to support the children." Nia stepped forward, her heavy, cloying perfume preceding her. She leaned in close, invading my personal space. I kept my expression carefully guarded, playing the role of the defeated victim they so desperately needed me to be. "I brought exactly what you asked for, Nia," I said, keeping my voice soft and submissive. "I just want this to be over. I want to go back to Trey." "Perfect!" Nia sneered, dropping her voice to a harsh whisper meant only for me. "Do not look so miserable, Camille. You are about to make a massive donation to my foundation. Smile for the cameras, and maybe I will let you keep the kid." They did not want to do this in a quiet corner. Jason's monstrous ego demanded an audience. He placed a heavy, possessive hand on my shoulder and physically guided me toward the center of the ballroom, right in front of the brightly lit presentation stage. He wanted maximum visibility for his supposed victory. "Let us do this properly," Jason instructed, his grip tightening uncomfortably on my white jacket. "The society photographer is waiting right by the stage. You hand the certified check to Nia. I give a little speech about family unity and your company's generosity, and we wrap this up nicely. If you cause a scene, I will call the police before you even reach the lobby." My parents flanked us, forming a tight, suffocating circle that blocked my path of retreat. "Make it quick, Camille," my mother hissed, her polite society smile never leaving her face. "You have already caused enough disruption this week with your dramatic behavior at the school. Just hand over the donation and leave quietly. We do not need your negative energy ruining Jason's big night." My father glared at me, his eyes filled with pure contempt. "You should be grateful your brother is even allowing you to participate in this event," he muttered. I stood in the exact center of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, entirely surrounded by the people who had spent my entire life trying to destroy my spirit. I reached slowly into the inner pocket of my white blazer. My fingers brushed against the thick, crisp envelope I had prepared alongside my legal team. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the federal agents subtly shifting their weight, closing the distance toward the stage. The audiovisual technician gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod from his control booth. Jason and Nia stood directly before me, their eyes practically glowing with unadulterated greed, entirely unaware that the luxurious floor beneath them was about to give way. The trap was fully armed, and they had just walked directly into the center of the crosshairs. I withdrew the crisp envelope from the inner pocket of my tailored blazer. Jason immediately stepped forward and reached out his hand to snatch it. His fingers were literally trembling with greedy anticipation. Instead of handing it to him, I smoothly sidestepped his grasp and walked directly past him toward the presentation stage. "What are you doing?" Jason hissed under his breath, his eyes darting nervously toward the society photographer who was adjusting his camera lens. "Bring the check over here right now." I ignored his desperate command completely. I ascended the 3 short steps onto the stage and walked straight to the mahogany podium. I wrapped my hand tightly around the microphone base. I looked up past the blinding spotlights to the shadows of the control booth and gave the audiovisual technician a sharp, definitive nod. Instantly, the soft classical music that had been floating through the Ritz-Carlton ballroom abruptly cut off. The sudden jarring silence caused hundreds of wealthy guests to stop their conversations and turn their attention entirely toward the stage. The massive digital screens flanking the podium, which had previously been displaying the elegant logo of Nia's charity foundation, suddenly went pitch black. I looked down at Jason and Nia, who were now standing frozen at the base of the stage. Their arrogant smiles had slipped, replaced by profound confusion. A few yards away, my parents had stopped mid-sentence. My mother lowered her champagne flute, her rigid posture tightening even further as she realized I was completely off script. I tapped the microphone once. The sharp sound echoed powerfully across the cavernous room, guaranteeing that I had the absolute undivided attention of every single person present. "Good evening, everyone." I began, my voice projecting cold, unyielding authority through the premium sound system. "My name is Camille. Many of you in this room might know me simply as Jason's younger sister. You have likely been fed a narrative that I am a quiet background figure in this prominent family. But I am not standing up here tonight in a familial capacity. I am standing before you all in a strictly legal one." Jason's face morphed from confusion to deep, furious irritation. He took a step toward the stage, his hands balling into fists. "Camille, get down from there," he demanded in a harsh whisper, trying to mask his panic from the elite guests standing nearby. "Give Nia the donation and stop embarrassing yourself." I did not even blink. I kept my gaze sweeping across the sea of designer gowns and custom tuxedos holding the crowd captive. "I am speaking to you tonight as the sole manager and principal creditor of the Apex Holdings Trust," I announced. A collective sharp gasp rippled through the front rows of investors and bank executives who instantly recognized the corporate name. The murmurs began immediately spreading like wildfire through the ballroom. For those of you who are unaware, I continued my tone, dropping to a dangerous icy register. Apex Holdings is the private equity firm that currently owns the deed to every single piece of real estate Jason claims to possess. I opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of stark, heavy legal ledgers. I held them up high under the stage lights for the entire room to witness. "Jason does not own the massive $10 million estate he and Nia live in," I stated loudly, ensuring my words reached the very back of the room. "He does not own the commercial properties he has been leveraging to secure your private investments. He is completely and utterly bankrupt. He owes my firm over $12 million a debt that is currently in severe default." Nia let out a high-pitched, breathy gasp of absolute horror. She stumbled backward, her emerald green sequin dress catching the light as she looked at Jason. Her eyes were wide with frantic desperation, silently begging him to tell the crowd it was a lie to fix the illusion she so desperately needed. But Jason was entirely paralyzed. The arrogant swagger, the slick charm, the golden child superiority had evaporated completely. He was left standing there as a hollow, terrified shell of a man. The blood drained from his face, leaving him deathly pale as the realization hit him. The sister he had bullied his entire life, the woman he had just tried to extort for cash, held the absolute leash to his total financial ruin. "You thought you could use an innocent child's safety to extort me for $2 million? I said, staring directly down into his panicked eyes. "You thought I would quietly hand over my hard-earned company funds to finance your escape from your own catastrophic failures? But you forgot one crucial detail, Jason. I am the one who built my own empire from the ground up while you burned yours to the ground out of pure greed." Right on cue, the massive digital screens behind me flickered violently to life. The technician had executed the final command. Instead of charity logos, the screens now displayed heavily redacted but legally undeniable foreclosure notices. Next to those were the verified financial graphs mapping the massive cryptocurrency margin call that had wiped out Jason's entire fake portfolio. The proof of his absolute staggering poverty was magnified 10 feet high for Chicago's elite to scrutinize. My father dropped his crystal glass. It hit the marble floor with a sharp, shattering crash, but nobody in the captivated crowd even glanced in his direction. Thomas and Diane were watching their carefully curated high society reputation disintegrate into ash right before their eyes. The son they had worshipped, the boy they had mortgaged their own historic home to protect, was being exposed as a colossal fraud in front of everyone they wanted to impress. The murmurs in the crowd exploded into a loud, chaotic buzz of outrage and shock. Wealthy investors began pulling out their phones, realizing the man they had been drinking with was actively scamming them. I looked down at Nia, whose designer gowns suddenly looked like a cheap, desperate costume. Her illusion of high society dominance was dead. She was no longer a wealthy, powerful philanthropist. She was the wife of a bankrupt con artist, stripped bare in front of the very people she had spent her life trying to deceive. She clutched her limited edition handbag against her chest heaving with panicked breaths as the sheer weight of her public humiliation crushed her. The trap had snapped shut with flawless precision, and there was absolutely no way out. I did not give them a single second to recover their breath. I raised my hand and signaled the audio-visual technician for the second phase of my strike. The massive digital screens shifted abruptly from the foreclosure notices to a series of highly classified bank statements. I had explicitly ordered Elias to highlight the account holder name in bright crimson digital ink. The name on the account was Trey. It was the protected trust fund left by his deceased biological father. Beside the boy's name, the screens displayed the withdrawal history. Hundreds of thousands of dollars transferred directly into accounts registered to Nia. The wealthy crowd watched in real time as the stolen funds were traced directly to luxury boutiques, exotic car dealerships, and high-end jewelry stores. The murmurs in the ballroom morphed into vocalized disgust. They were looking at absolute, undeniable proof that the woman standing in the emerald green dress had systematically robbed her own 10-year-old child to buy her way into their social circles. But visual evidence was only half of the execution. I needed them to hear the true depth of the evil they harbored. I tapped the microphone a second time. "You asked me to bring a $2 million donation tonight. Jason," I said, my voice slicing through the rising clamor of the ballroom. "You promised that if I paid you this money, you would let me keep Trey. You promised that if I refused, you would destroy him. Let us share that specific conversation with your guests." I stepped back from the podium. The high-definition speakers that had previously played soft classical music now crackled to life with the crisp, undeniable audio of our phone call from yesterday morning. Jason's voice boomed across the Ritz-Carlton ballroom. "If you refuse, we call the Chicago Police Department right now. Your little medical proxy only covers emergency care, Camille." Then Nia's shrill, malicious voice echoed off the crystal chandeliers. "The police will show up at your massive house, take Trey away from you, and hand him right back to us." The guests recoiled physically, stepping away from Jason and Nia as if they were infected with a contagious disease. But the recording was not finished. The most damning part of the extortion was yet to come. Jason's recorded voice grew dark and vicious, filling every corner of the opulent space. "We will make absolutely sure he gets placed in the most overcrowded, underfunded group home in the state system. A soft kid like Trey will not survive a week in a place like that without getting beaten half to death." A collective gasp of pure horror erupted from the crowd. Several women covered their mouths in shock. The hospital board members, who had just been drinking champagne with Nia, stared at her with absolute revulsion. The illusion was completely eradicated. There was no hiding behind designer clothes or fake philanthropic smiles anymore. They were exposed as child abusers and extortionists in front of the most powerful people in Chicago. "Turn it off!" Jason screamed, his face contorting into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. He lunged toward the stage, his hands grappling for the edge of the platform. "Turn that off right now, you crazy witch!" He did not make it up the stairs. The tall man in the tuxedo, who had been standing near the emergency exit, moved with terrifying speed. The two women near the control booth abandoned their sparkling water and flanked the stage. In less than 3 seconds, a team of 6 undercover federal agents converged on the center of the ballroom. "Federal agents. Financial Crimes Division," the tall man shouted, flashing a gold badge as he intercepted Jason. He grabbed my brother's arm, twisting it sharply behind his back with practiced, aggressive efficiency. Jason let out a yelp of shock and pain as his face was shoved roughly against the polished marble floor. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and interstate extortion," the agent announced, his voice loud enough to cut through the chaotic shouting of the crowd. "You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you start using it." The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly near the base of the stage. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my entire life. Jason, the golden child, the untouchable prince of our toxic family, was currently pinned to the ground in a custom tuxedo, his hands bound tightly behind his back. "No," Nia shrieked, her voice tearing through the ballroom. "This is a mistake. He did not do anything. She forged those tapes. She is lying." She lunged toward the federal agent holding Jason down, but 2 female detectives immediately blocked her path. They gripped her arms firmly, preventing her from interfering with the arrest. The reality of the situation finally crashed down on Nia with the force of a falling building. The money was gone. The social standing was annihilated. Her husband was going to federal prison and her entire life was over. Nia's legs simply gave out beneath her. She collapsed onto the hard marble floor, her emerald green sequin dress pooling around her in a pathetic, glittering puddle. She began to sob hysterically, slamming her manicured hands against the ground and screaming that her life was ruined. The carefully constructed mask of the wealthy society wife completely dissolved, leaving behind nothing but a desperate broken fraud, throwing a massive tantrum in front of hundreds of silent, disgusted witnesses. I watched the federal agents secure the perimeter of the dance floor. The sheer magnitude of the operation was staggering. The agents moved with practiced coordination, securing Jason's personal belongings and confiscating the cell phone he had used to issue the extortion demands. Jason struggled weakly against the restraints his arrogant facade completely stripped away. "This is a misunderstanding," Jason stammered, his voice cracking, as the agents marched him toward the grand double doors. "I am a respected businessman. You cannot do this to me. I know the mayor." The lead agent simply chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "You are going to need a lot more than the mayor where you are heading, buddy." Nia continued to thrash on the floor, her screams echoing off the crystal chandeliers. She clawed at her own hair, her perfect highlights becoming a tangled mess. She wailed that she was pregnant, that she was a victim, that Jason had forced her into everything. The elite crowd watched her pathetic display with cold, unsympathetic eyes. Not a single person stepped forward to help her. They simply pulled their expensive gowns and tailored suits out of her way, treating her like a piece of garbage that had accidentally washed up on their pristine shores. I stepped back from the podium, my breathing steady and my heart calm. I stood tall on the stage, my pristine white suit glowing under the spotlights. I did not feel an ounce of pity or remorse. I had successfully excised the cancer from my family. I had protected a vulnerable child from a lifetime of systematic abuse, and I had delivered absolute, undeniable justice to the monsters who thought they were untouchable. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom slammed shut behind the federal agents, but the reverberation seemed to shake the very foundation of the Ritz-Carlton. The chaotic shouting that had accompanied Jason's arrest abruptly died down, replaced by a suffocating, electrified silence. The elite guests of Chicago society stood frozen, their champagne flutes suspended in midair, their eyes darting between the empty space where my brother had just stood, and the massive digital screens that were still broadcasting his absolute financial destruction. At the base of the stage, Nia continued to heave dry, pathetic sobs into the polished marble floor. Her emerald green designer gown, which only minutes ago had been her armor of superiority, now looked like a cheap, tragic costume. Not a single person from her carefully curated circle of wealthy friends stepped forward to offer her a hand. They were too busy distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout of her crimes. My attention shifted away from the crying woman on the floor. Through the parted crowd, two figures were slowly moving toward the stage, looking as though they had just aged 20 years in the span of 5 minutes. It was my parents. Thomas and Diane walked with a rigid, unnatural gait. The arrogant, untouchable aura they had projected for decades had been entirely vaporized. My father's face was a pale, sickly shade of gray, his hands visibly trembling at his sides. My mother gripped her diamond necklace so tightly her knuckles were stark white, her eyes wide with a terror I had never seen her display before. The reality of what they had just witnessed was finally penetrating their delusion. They had not just watched their golden child get hauled away in handcuffs by federal authorities. They had just watched their entire financial future evaporate. Every single cent they had poured into Jason's sinking ship was gone. The second mortgage they had secretly taken out on their historic North Shore mansion, the liquidated retirement accounts, the drained stock portfolios, it was all tied to the massive debt I now legally controlled. They had bankrupted themselves to protect a criminal, and now the entire city knew it. The wealthy investors and hospital board members, who had been drinking their expensive wine just moments before, were now glaring at Thomas and Diane. The whispering around them was ruthless. Society friends who had attended their lavish anniversary dinners were already pulling out their phones, deleting my parents' contact information, erasing them from their exclusive social circles. In the brutal world of Chicago's elite financial ruin was the ultimate, unforgivable sin, and my parents had just been publicly marked as toxic liabilities. "Camille." My father choked out, his voice hoarse and stripped of its usual commanding boom. He stopped at the edge of the stage, looking up at me with desperate, bloodshot eyes. Please tell me this is some kind of corporate misunderstanding. Tell me you can fix this. You own the debt. You can drop the charges. You can make this go away. I looked down at the man who had spent my entire life making me feel incredibly small, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sorrow, and certainly no obligation. I do not fix the messes made by federal fraudsters, Thomas, I said, my voice carrying the crisp, cold authority of a judge delivering a sentence. Your son forged documents, embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from an innocent child's trust fund, and attempted to extort me for millions. He belongs exactly where they are taking him. My mother let out a sharp, ragged gasp. She reached out her trembling fingers, grabbing the edge of the mahogany podium. Camille, you cannot do this to us, she pleaded, tears streaking her immaculate makeup. We put everything we had into Jason's company to keep him afloat. Our home is leveraged to the maximum. If you call in those debts, the bank will foreclose on the estate. We will have absolutely nothing left. We will be out on the street. I stared into her panic-stricken eyes, remembering the night she had watched Nia wish death upon my fragile 6-year-old son. I remembered the cold, dismissive laugh she gave when I walked out of her house with my children in the freezing winter air. You made your investment choices, Diane, I replied smoothly, not lowering my gaze for a fraction of a second. You chose to mortgage your house and your future to protect a monster. You enabled his arrogance, you funded his lifestyle, and you turned a blind eye while he and his wife starved a 10-year-old boy to buy designer handbags. You bet your entire life on the golden child. I highly suggest you prepare yourselves for the consequences of that wager, because I will be collecting every single dime my company is owed. My father tried to reach out his hand, trembling as he attempted to grab my sleeve. Camille, you are our daughter. You cannot just walk away and let the bank take our home. We raised you. We gave you everything. I smoothly stepped out of his reach. You gave me nothing but constant criticism and a front-row seat to your favoritism, I corrected him, my voice devoid of any warmth. You watched this woman tell my 6-year-old son that he should be dead, and you told me to stop being sensitive. You do not get to claim the title of family now that your chosen prince has burned your kingdom to the ground. You have no daughter. You only have a creditor. My father took a stumbling step backward, grabbing my mother's arm to steady himself. The sheer gravity of their ruin was physically crushing them. They had spent their entire lives treating me like a disposable backup plan, a scapegoat they could manipulate and discard at will. Now the daughter they had so viciously discarded was the sole executioner of their financial demise, and there was no bargaining table left. I stepped away from the podium and slowly descended the 3 short steps from the stage. The crowd parted instantly, giving me a wide, respectful berth. I walked past my parents without a second glance, leaving them to drown in the shallow, pathetic reality they had built. I stopped right beside the crumpled, sobbing figure of my sister-in-law. Nia was still curled on the marble floor, her manicured hands covering her face as she wept hysterically over the loss of her fake empire and her stolen wealth. She looked up at me, her eyeliner running down her cheeks in dark, messy streaks. Her eyes were filled with a desperate, venomous hatred, but there was no power left behind it. She was broken, stripped of her titles, her money, and her cruel authority. I looked down at her, taking in the full measure of her pathetic, shattered existence. I thought of my brave little Leo, breathing easily in his sleep at home. I thought of Trey, the terrified boy she had locked in a dark room. I leaned down slightly, ensuring my voice was low-measured and perfectly clear. It is all due to your bad parenting. Nia let out a fresh, agonizing wail, burying her face back into her hands as the absolute weight of her destruction crushed the last remaining breath out of her lungs. I straightened my posture, adjusted the lapel of my pristine white blazer, and walked toward the grand exit of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom. The heavy gilded doors swung open for me, revealing the cool, clear Chicago night outside. I stepped out into the fresh air, my stiletto heels clicking sharply against the pavement. The toxic chains that had bound me to that family for 3 decades were permanently severed, and for the first time in my life, I breathed in the pure, unadulterated air of total freedom. That breath of fresh Chicago air sustained me for the next 3 weeks, as the legal machinery I had set in motion ground my family's remaining illusions into dust. Jason had been denied bail and was sitting in a federal holding facility, awaiting trial for wire fraud and embezzlement. That left Nia completely alone to face the final reckoning. We met again not in a lavish ballroom, but inside the stark, imposing walls of the state family court. This was the official custody hearing to determine the permanent fate of 10-year-old Trey. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom sealed us inside a space where wealth and social status no longer held any power. I sat at the petitioner table with my attorney David, my posture perfectly straight, and my expression completely serene. Across the aisle, Nia sat next to a court-appointed public defender. She looked like a ghost of the woman she had been at the Ritz-Carlton. Her designer clothes and luxury assets had been entirely seized by the bankruptcy courts, leaving her in a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit. The arrogant, high society swagger was gone, replaced by the frantic, trapped energy of a cornered animal. But a cornered animal is exactly when they strike the hardest. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with sharp, discerning eyes, called the court to order. David had already submitted the preliminary evidence of Trey's severe malnutrition and the financial theft. The undeniable proof of their child endangerment was sitting right there in the official court file. But Nia was not going down without a fight. Stripped of her husband, her money, and her fake reputation, she resorted to the only weapon she had left, which was absolute character assassination. When her public defender called her to the stand, Nia launched into a desperate theatrical performance. She wept dry, tearless sobs, gripping the edges of the witness stand as she painted a completely fabricated picture of me. She claimed I was a mentally unstable, vindictive woman who had orchestrated this entire legal circus purely out of jealousy. She told the judge that I had kidnapped Trey using a fraudulent medical proxy just to punish my brother. She insisted that I was completely unfit to raise any child, let alone a boy who had already been through so much trauma. Then she played what she thought was her ultimate trump card. She brought up my 6-year-old son, Leo. Nia twisted the narrative of Leo's anaphylactic shock with a level of malice that was genuinely staggering. She completely omitted the fact that my parents, Thomas and Diane, were the ones who had negligently fed him the peanut product. Instead, she told the judge that Leo's near-fatal allergy incident was a direct result of my careless, reckless parenting. She claimed I was negligent with his medical needs, and that I could not even keep my own biological child safe. She dramatically pleaded with the court, arguing that placing a vulnerable boy like Trey in my home would be an absolute death sentence. It was a vile, calculated lie designed specifically to exploit the court's primary concern for child safety. I sat at the table, my face a mask of absolute calm. I did not interrupt her. I did not shout objections or let a single ounce of outrage show on my face. I simply let her spin her frantic web of deceit. When Nia finally finished her dramatic monologue, the judge looked over at David, expecting a fierce cross-examination. David stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and approached the bench carrying a thick, pristine white binder. He did not ask Nia a single question. He did not even look at her. Instead, he submitted the binder directly into evidence for the judge to review. He announced that the binder contained the comprehensive certified medical records for my son Leo, covering the exact 6-month period since I had cut ties with my toxic family. David methodically walked the judge through the documents. He pointed out the initial hospital intake forms from the pediatric intensive care unit, clearly stating that the allergic reaction occurred while Leo was exclusively under the care of his grandparents, Thomas and Diane. He then directed the court to the subsequent pediatric pulmonology reports. The records documented a flawless, miraculous recovery. David read aloud the official chart notes written by top Chicago pediatric specialists. The doctors detailed my relentless adherence to medical protocols, my meticulous dietary management, and the extensive rehabilitative therapies I had personally funded and overseen. The medical experts had explicitly noted in their official legal files that Leo was thriving entirely due to my exceptional, devoted maternal care. My son was no longer dependent on his portable oxygen machine. He was running, playing, and living a perfectly healthy, vibrant life. because I had protected him with everything I had. David then walked back to his table, picked up the recent emergency hospital intake report for Trey, and placed it right next to Leo's glowing health records on the judge's bench. He drew a sharp, undeniable contrast that silenced the entire courtroom. On one side of the bench was a 6-year-old boy who had miraculously recovered from the brink of death under my fierce protection. On the other side was a 10-year-old boy who had been systematically starved and emotionally terrorized while living under Nia's roof. The visual and medical evidence was absolutely insurmountable. Nia stared at the documents from the witness stand, her jaw trembling as the reality of her failure washed over her. Her final, desperate lie had just been weaponized directly against her. She had tried to label me an unfit mother to save herself, but she had inadvertently given my legal team the perfect opportunity to prove to the court that I was a fiercely capable protector. The judge flipped through the certified medical records, her expression hardening into absolute disgust as she looked back up at Nia. The false tears Nia had been crying suddenly dried up completely. She shrank back into the wooden chair, realizing that her theatrical lies held absolutely zero weight against the cold, hard truth of medical science. I watched her perfectly constructed defense crumble into dust, knowing that the final nail in her coffin was about to be delivered by the very person she had tried to destroy. The absolute silence in the courtroom was suddenly shattered by the sharp squeak of a wooden chair. Nia had physically deflated, sinking so low into her seat, she almost disappeared behind the defendant table. She had nothing left to say. Her vicious lies had been entirely incinerated by the cold, hard medical truth of my son's miraculous recovery. But my legal team was not finished. We had one final witness to present, and he was the only one whose voice truly mattered today. David respectfully addressed the bench and called 10-year-old Trey to the stand. The heavy oak side door of the courtroom opened. A court-appointed child advocate gently guided Trey into the room. He was wearing a soft knit sweater I had bought him the week prior. He looked significantly healthier and more vibrant than he had on that terrifying afternoon in the school parking lot, but he was still remarkably small for his age. My heart ached with fierce protective pride as he walked down the center aisle. He did not look at Nia once. He kept his eyes locked entirely on me. I gave him a warm, reassuring nod, silently promising him that this was the very last time he would ever have to be afraid of her. The judge, a formidable woman who had just stared down Nia with absolute unyielding contempt, immediately softened her entire demeanor. She leaned forward over the massive wooden bench and spoke to Trey with profound gentleness. She asked him to simply tell the court the truth about what it was like living inside that massive $10 million mansion. Trey gripped the edges of the wooden witness stand. His knuckles were no longer bruised, but his small hands still trembled slightly. He took a deep, shaky breath and began to speak. His voice echoed through the vast, quiet courtroom, carrying the devastating weight of a child who had been robbed of his innocence and his basic human dignity. He told the judge everything. He described the terrifying isolation of being locked in the dark basement room for hours, just for asking for a glass of tap water after bedtime. He detailed the agonizing hunger pangs he endured while Jason and Nia threw lavish catered dinner parties right upstairs. He explained how they forced him to wear expensive tailored suits for high society photographs, only to immediately strip them off and banish him to the shadows the moment the wealthy guests departed. Tears began to stream down his pale cheeks as he recalled the night he heard Jason and Nia plotting to throw him into a violent group home. He told the court how they openly discussed using his life as a disposable bargaining chip to steal $2 million from my business. He explained how Nia constantly reminded him that he was a burden, a financial drain that stood in the way of her buying designer handbags and outfitting her new biological baby's nursery. The courtroom was dead silent, captivated, and completely horrified by the pure, unadulterated evil being exposed by this brave little boy. Even the court stenographer paused for a fraction of a second, visibly moved by the sheer cruelty of the extortion plot Trey was describing. Then Trey looked directly up at the judge. He wiped his tears with the sleeve of his sweater and delivered a plea that absolutely broke my heart and simultaneously healed it. Please do not make me go back to them. Trey begged, his voice cracking with raw, unfiltered desperation. Please do not let them send me away to that awful place. Aunt Camille came to get me when nobody else in the whole world would. She feeds me every single day. She lets me sleep with the light on so I'm not scared of the dark anymore. She makes me feel safe. I just want to stay with her forever. I felt a hot tear trace its way down my own cheek. I did not bother wiping it away. The judge let out a heavy, ragged sigh. She looked down at her clasped hands for a long moment, visibly composing herself. When she finally raised her head and locked eyes with Nia, the sheer magnitude of her judicial fury was terrifying to witness. The subtle gentleness she had shown Trey completely vanished, replaced entirely by the righteous, unyielding wrath of the law. "Ma'am," the judge began, her voice striking the courtroom walls like a physical blow. In my 20 years sitting on this bench, I have presided over countless tragic cases of child neglect. But the level of calculated psychological torture and physical starvation you and your husband inflicted upon this innocent boy, simply to maintain a grotesque illusion of upper-class wealth, is among the most despicable acts of cruelty I have ever encountered. Nia kept her head bowed, staring blindly at her lap, utterly incapable of meeting the judge's furious gaze. She was trembling, finally realizing that her actions had real, inescapable consequences. You treated this child not as a human being, but as a prop for your vanity, and a hostage for your extreme greed. The judge continued, her tone dripping with absolute disgust. You attempted to use this courtroom today to spew fabricated, malicious lies against the very woman who stepped in to save him from your daily abuse. You have demonstrated a complete and total lack of basic maternal instinct, remorse, or basic human decency. The judge picked up her heavy wooden gavel. The air in the room felt highly pressurized, vibrating with the intense anticipation of the final blow. It is the immediate and permanent ruling of this court that both you and your husband are entirely stripped of all parental and guardianship rights regarding this minor, the judge declared loudly and clearly. You will have absolutely no legal, physical, or communicative access to this child ever again. Furthermore, full, permanent, and irrevocable legal guardianship of Trey is hereby granted immediately to his Aunt Camille. The gavel struck the sounding block with a sharp, deafening crack that echoed like a gunshot. It was the sound of absolute victory. It was the sound of a heavy, toxic chain being permanently shattered into dust. Nia let out a pathetic, muffled sob, hiding her face in her hands, as the bailiff immediately moved in to escort her out of the courtroom. She was leaving with absolutely nothing. She had no husband, no money, no social standing, and now she was legally stripped of her title as a mother. She was a ghost returning to the ruins of her own catastrophic making. I stood up from the petitioner table as Trey ran down from the witness stand. He threw his arms around my waist, burying his face into my coat. I hugged him back fiercely, resting my chin on top of his head. We had done it. We had faced the monsters in the cold, harsh light of day, and we had utterly destroyed their power over him. David packed up our legal binders, offering me a warm, victorious smile. I took Trey by the hand and we walked down the center aisle of the courtroom together. We pushed open the heavy oak doors, stepping out into the brightly lit corridor of the courthouse. I was fully prepared to take my new son home and celebrate our hard-won freedom, but the past was not quite done with me yet. Standing right there in the middle of the courthouse hallway, waiting for me with desperate, tear-stained faces, were my parents. I did not break my stride. I did not slow down or even turn my head to acknowledge the desperate, tear-stained faces of my parents waiting in that courthouse corridor. I simply tightened my grip on Trey's hand and guided him straight past them as if they were entirely invisible. My mother reached out, grasping at the empty air, but David and my security detail smoothly intercepted her, blocking her path. I walked out into the bright afternoon sun, leaving their pathetic apologies echoing uselessly behind closed doors. They had chosen their golden child, and they were going to burn in the ashes of his destruction. Exactly 48 hours later, the final mechanism of their ruin clicked into place. The private equity firm I anonymously controlled officially executed the foreclosure documents. The massive, staggering debt Thomas and Diane had secretly taken on to bail out Jason had fully defaulted. The bank moved in with swift, merciless precision. They seized the historic North Shore mansion that had served as the glittering fortress of my family's toxic hierarchy for over 3 decades. I decided to take one final drive through the affluent Chicago suburb. I did not go out of some lingering sense of nostalgia or misplaced familial duty. I went because I needed to see the absolute physical conclusion of the empire that had tried to crush my children. I pulled my car slowly up to the edge of the sprawling estate and shifted into park, letting the engine idle quietly. The sight before me was a masterpiece of poetic justice. There were no luxury moving companies. There were no professional organizers carefully packing their expensive antiques or imported crystal. The bank had locked them out and given them a matter of hours to remove whatever personal items they could carry. Thomas and Diane, the ultimate architects of high society snobbery, were standing on the curb of their manicured front lawn, furiously shoving their designer clothing into heavy black plastic trash bags. My mother was wearing a wrinkled tracksuit, her hair unstyled, and her face devoid of the expensive makeup she used to hide her true nature. My father looked physically shrunken, his shoulders hunched as he dragged a garbage bag full of shoes across the pristine driveway. They looked exactly like what they were, hollow, broken frauds who had gambled their entire existence on a criminal and lost everything. My mother looked up from her pile of trash bags and spotted my car idling by the curb. For a second, she froze, staring at my vehicle in absolute disbelief. Then a frantic, desperate light ignited in her eyes. She dropped the black plastic bag and began sprinting toward my car. My father looked up and immediately followed her, stumbling over the curb in his rush to reach me. I did not drive away. I pressed a button and smoothly rolled down the passenger side window, allowing the crisp afternoon air into the cabin. I rested my arm on the center console and watched them approach with cold, detached observation. "Camille!" My mother gasped, gripping the edge of the open window with white-knuckled fingers. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears. "Thank God you are here. You have to help us." The bank locked the doors. They took the cars, they took the accounts, they took absolutely everything. We have nowhere to go. My father arrived at the window completely out of breath. His usual booming, authoritative voice was reduced to a pathetic, whimpering rasp. "We were wrong, Camille," he pleaded, leaning down so I could see the sheer panic in his eyes. "We were so incredibly wrong about Jason, and we were wrong about you. You proved your point. You won. Now please, you have to write a check to the bank. You have the money. You can clear this debt and save the house." I looked at the two people who had brought me into this world. I looked at the hands that had pushed me aside for 30 years. "Save the house," I asked, my voice perfectly level and entirely devoid of empathy. "Why would I do that, Thomas?" "Because we are your parents." My mother sobbed openly, weeping as cars driven by their wealthy former friends slowly drove past, actively staring at their humiliating eviction. "We have absolutely nothing left, Camille. We cannot live on the street. Let us come stay with you. You have that massive new home. You have plenty of room for us. We can help you raise Trey and Mia and Leo. We can be a real family again. Just please do not leave us out here like this." The sheer audacity of her request was staggering. After allowing my son to be poisoned, after watching Nia verbally abuse my children, after sacrificing their entire livelihood to protect a child abuser, they actually believed they could just move into my sanctuary. They thought my success was a safety net they could casually use after their own malicious choices blew up in their faces. I looked at my mother, and then I looked at my father. I let the silence stretch out, forcing them to sit in the suffocating, desperate agony of their own making. "I want you to think back to your anniversary dinner 6 months ago." I said, my words slicing through the air with surgical precision. "I want you to remember exactly what Nia said while she looked at my fragile, sick 6-year-old boy who was struggling to breathe because of your direct negligence." She pointed her finger at my child, and you both sat there and defended her. "You told me to stop being sensitive." My parents stared at me, their faces draining of whatever color they had left. The realization of what was happening finally clicked into place. They were not begging a daughter for help. They were begging the executioner for a pardon. You are broke. You are homeless, and you are completely erased from the society you worshipped, I stated coldly, leaning slightly closer to the window. Look at yourselves standing on a curb with your belongings in garbage bags. You might as well be dead. It is all due to your bad parenting. My mother let out a sharp, agonizing wail of pure devastation. She stumbled backward away from the car, covering her mouth with her trembling hands, as the exact cruel words she had endorsed were turned back on her with lethal force. My father stood completely paralyzed, staring at me with hollow, empty eyes, as the final crushing weight of his failure broke his spirit entirely. I did not wait for another word. I pressed the button to roll up the tinted window, cutting off the sound of my mother's hysterical sobbing. I shifted the car into drive and slowly pulled away from the curb. I checked the rearview mirror one last time. Thomas and Diane were collapsed on the sidewalk, sitting in the dirt right next to their black plastic trash bags, entirely alone and utterly ruined. I turned my eyes back to the road ahead, feeling the absolute finality of justice settle peacefully into my bones. 2 years have passed since I drove away from that curb, leaving the architects of my lifelong misery sitting in the dirt next to their garbage bags. The finality of justice did not just settle into my bones that afternoon, it became the permanent, unbreakable foundation upon which I built my entire future. The legal system moved with a swift and merciless efficiency that my family had never anticipated. Without my parents' wealth to shield him from consequences, Jason faced the full crushing weight of the federal government. The golden child, the arrogant prince who believed he was entirely untouchable, is currently serving a 15-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary. He was convicted of wire fraud, embezzlement, and interstate extortion. He was stripped of his custom-tailored tuxedos and his high society swagger reduced to nothing more than an inmate number in a beige jumpsuit. He spends his days in a concrete cell, completely cut off from the wealth and status he tried to steal from an innocent child. Nia did not fare much better in the aftermath of her catastrophic downfall. Stripped of her parental rights, divorced from her convicted husband, and slapped with a massive court-ordered restitution mandate, she was forced to face the brutal reality of the world she had previously mocked. The woman who once draped herself in emerald green sequins and drank expensive champagne at the Ritz-Carlton now works overnight shifts as a commercial cleaner for a downtown hospital. She spends her nights scrubbing the very floors she used to walk across in her designer heels. Every single dollar she earns above the absolute poverty line is legally garnished to pay back the trust fund she so viciously drained. Her grand illusions of high society dominance were permanently scrubbed away, leaving her with nothing but a mop, an empty apartment, and a mountain of inescapable debt. As for my parents, Thomas and Diane, the bank took absolutely everything they possessed. The foreclosure wiped out their remaining dignity, and their reputation in Chicago was completely incinerated. With their social circle entirely abandoning them and their credit utterly destroyed, they had nowhere left to hide. They are now permanently confined to a cramped, underfunded state-run nursing facility on the gloomy outskirts of the city. They share a tiny, sterile room with faded linoleum floors and bare, depressing walls, a stark and agonizing contrast to the historic North Shore mansion they once ruled with an iron fist. They spend their days sitting in twin vinyl chairs, completely isolated and ignored, having sacrificed their entire family, their home, and their legacy for a son who left them with absolutely nothing. I never looked back at any of them. I sold my old property and purchased a sprawling, sunlit mansion in a quiet, fiercely protected suburban neighborhood. It is not a cold, imposing fortress built for showing off to wealthy investors or hosting pretentious charity galas. It is a warm, beautiful home built entirely for healing, filled with natural light, vibrant colors, and absolute unwavering safety. I stood on my wraparound cedar deck this afternoon, holding a mug of warm chamomile tea, watching the perfect scene unfold in my lush green backyard. The late spring sun was shining brightly, casting a warm golden glow over the meticulously manicured grass. Trey, who recently turned 11, was sprinting across the lawn with a black and white soccer ball at his feet. The hollow, terrified boy I had pulled from that school parking lot was completely gone. In his place was a vibrant, healthy, and incredibly fast young athlete, his bright laughter echoing loudly through the tall oak trees. Chasing right behind him was Leo. My brave little boy was running at full speed, his cheeks flushed with a beautiful, healthy color. There was no portable oxygen concentrator weighing him down, no wheezing and no fragility. He was just a normal, energetic 6-year-old, trying his absolute hardest to steal the ball from his big brother. Mia was playing goalie near the blooming flower beds, giggling uncontrollably as Trey purposefully kicked the ball gently in her direction so she could block it with her tiny hands. The ball deflected off Mia's foot and rolled quickly across the grass, stopping right at the base of the wooden deck stairs near my feet. Trey jogged over to retrieve it, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. He looked up at me, his face glowing with physical exertion and pure, unadulterated joy. "Hey, Mom, can you toss that back?" he called out loudly. The word hung in the crisp spring air. "Mom." He froze instantly. His dark eyes widened slightly as he realized what had just slipped out of his mouth. For a fraction of a second, the old conditioned panic flickered across his face, a residual ghost of the dark days when making a mistake in his previous house meant severe and immediate punishment. He held his breath, his shoulders tensing as he waited for a correction or a reprimand. I did not correct him. I set my mug of tea down on the railing and walked down the first 2 wooden steps. I picked up the soccer ball, a massive, genuine smile breaking across my face. I looked directly into his eyes, projecting all the unconditional love and fierce protection I held in my heart. I tossed the ball directly into his waiting hands. "Nice block out there," I said softly. "Go easy on your brother and sister." Trey caught the ball, the tension instantly melting from his small shoulders. His apprehensive expression completely dissolved into a beaming, brilliant smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "Thanks, Mom," he said, this time entirely intentional, his voice firm, happy, and completely secure. He turned around and sprinted back toward the makeshift goal, calling out to Leo to get ready for the next play. I stood on the bottom step of my deck, watching my 3 beautiful children play together in the warm sunlight. A profound, unshakable sense of peace washed over my entire being. For so many years, I had allowed society and familial obligation to convince me that cutting ties with toxic blood relatives was a tragic, shameful loss. I had been deeply conditioned to believe that you had to endure emotional abuse simply because the people inflicting it shared your DNA. But looking at my thriving, healthy family, I finally understood the absolute truth. Removing Thomas, Diane, Jason, and Nia from my life was not a loss at all. It was simply pulling the deep, poisonous weeds that had been choking the soil for decades. You have to ruthlessly clear out the rot and the decay to make room for something beautiful to grow. By ripping those weeds out by their very roots, I had finally given my real garden the space, the light, and the safety it desperately needed to bloom. Have you ever had to pull the toxic weeds in your own life to protect the people you truly love? Have you ever walked away from abusive relatives to build a beautiful, healthy family of your own choosing? I would love to hear your stories and experiences in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about reclaiming your power, demanding justice, and setting unbreakable boundaries. Remember that your peace is always worth protecting, and sometimes the most beautiful, loving families are the ones we build from the ground up. Thank you for listening, and I wish you all the strength and courage to let your own gardens bloom. The power of severing toxic roots. The profound journey from being a marginalized scapegoat to a fierce, independent protector offers a vital life lesson. Toxicity does not deserve a place in your life simply because it shares your DNA. For decades, the expectation was to endure emotional abuse, financial manipulation, and cruel favoritism in the name of familial loyalty. Society often pressures individuals to tolerate mistreatment to keep the peace, but this narrative completely dismantles that dangerous expectation. The true lesson is that enforcing absolute boundaries is an act of survival, not vengeance. When ties were finally severed with manipulative parents and a destructive brother, it was not a loss of family. Instead, it was the necessary removal of a poisonous force that actively threatened innocent children's safety and well-being. Walking away from abusers and refusing to be extorted is the ultimate display of self-worth. You are never obligated to set yourself on fire to keep toxic relatives warm. Authentic family dynamics are built on a bedrock of mutual respect, unconditional love, and genuine protection. Sometimes finding your real family means having the immense courage to build it from the ground up entirely on your own terms. It requires the strength to pull out the deep poisonous weeds so that your own beautiful garden can finally thrive in the sunlight. Take a moment to evaluate the boundaries in your own life to protect your peace at all costs, and please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below.